Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number 250. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by a whole host of people to talk about God of War Ragnarok, the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 exclusive that is renowned this year in a rather slow year. Actually, from when we were recording, the VGAs or whatever they're called now just happened yesterday, and God of War didn't win Game of the Year or Director of the Year. That went to Elden Ring, but it won a bunch of other awards. So obviously an acclaimed game. So let's go around the horn and get everyone introduced here. Chris, welcome. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. I'm excited to talk about God of War because I feel like there's kind of a lot of meat on this bone, and I'm excited to get into it.
Me too. I just beat it a couple hours ago. As I said on Sacred Symbols, I had basically gotten to the very end, you know, when it's like, are you sure you don't want to do anything else, Kratos? And then I just stopped there, and then I started going and trying to kill all the ravens and do all this and just do as much as I can. And then today I was out of time, so I'm like, all right, now I got to go beat the game. And I still have much to do. All right, Dustin, wearing your PlayStation Christmas sweater. I have the same one. I'll probably be wearing that. I have one of those. I also bought a 311 one this year. I'm excited to wear as well. So I have to find a few different festive activities there to fit that in. But how are you, my friend?
Pretty good. A little tired, quite frankly. We're coming off the heels of the longest episode of Sacred Symbols ever, which is exciting. And I woke up this morning and apparently there's a boil water advisory going around now. Some kind of water main break. Now, here's the thing is, I took some like a heartburn pill that I take, and I just used the sink and not thought about it. I'm like, Holly, what's going to happen to me now? She's like, well, there could be some kind of bacteria or something that kills you. It's like, well, so be it. If this is how I go, then I guess that's it. That last heartburn pill. Maybe I'll drop dead during the show, God willing.
Well,
maybe not, though. I don't know.
God willing, indeed. All right. Hoeg, Rick Hoeg. Legal analyst, lawyer, Hoeg Law, friend of the show, often on our shows for legal analysis, but sometimes on for games analysis as well. What was that? I was thinking back, did we do Returnal together or something like that?
We did do Returnal. I was on the Deathloop stream.
Deathloop, that might have been what it was. And I don't think
I was on Deathloop.
Was I on that one or was I not on that one? I don't remember.
I don't think you were.
No, because I beat it this year, so I wouldn't have been on it. Okay. Well, welcome, my friend. How are you doing?
Well, I'm always thrilled, as we've talked about, to get invited to one of these parties and nobody's going to ask me any legal questions. I don't think. No. It might pop up in God of War Ragnarok. And for folks that are doing the math at home, since the VGAs were yesterday, that's also the day that the Federal Trade Commission decided to sue Microsoft. So it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, busy times for you, my friend. And I know you were on Defining Duke recently as well. And we just did an episode about Zaum that I thought was really good about Disco Elysium and all the rest. So yeah, a lot of things going on as we get into the end of the year, but people really wanted us to cover this game. I was originally not going to do the spoiler cast, but then people got upset. So I did do it. The game, this is just such a horrible time of year as far as having time to play. I don't know how people find the time to play so many video games. It's just, this took me about a month to get through.
And well, this one was beefy. So. Yeah.
Really long game. All right. So let's start with our guest here and stick with you, Hoeg. We'll start at the very top. What did you think of God of War Ragnarok?
Yeah, so I mean, I think some people that follow me on social media probably see my face come up here, hear my voice, and say, oh my God, you brought that guy in on Ragnarok? Because I have given my criticisms of the game in various aspects. I liked it. I think it's a good game. I liken it to a guest or a family member that you haven't seen in a while. You like catching up with them. You enjoy the conversation, and then days turn into weeks, turn into months. It just stays a little bit long. I thought God of War Ragnarok had a lot of good pieces, wasn't as edited or really kind of brought down to its focus as much as I would have liked to have seen. So what could have been a great game experience for me became something of a middle of the road 7 or 8 type experience.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I'll reserve what I have to say for the game last. Chris, let's go to you. What did you think of God of War Ragnarok? Just, 40,000 foot.
Yeah, I felt really good about it. Like I really enjoyed my time with it. There were definitely parts where I feel like it slowed down a bit too much for my liking. And, there were certainly, I mean, obviously this is a spoiler cast, so we're going to get into it, but specifically the Atreus bits, I did not care for as much. I didn't really find myself enamored with that gameplay style at all, especially, in a God of War game, you want to rip shit apart. You want to cleave into, it's like, it kind of reminds me of when Gears of War 4 came out and you were just fighting robots the whole time. And it's like, robots don't bleed. There's no satisfaction in chainsawing a iPhone in half compared to like a zombie or like a fucking mole person. So I feel like there was a pretty significant chunk of this game, maybe not like as much as it could have been, but there's a pretty significant chunk of this game where I was just like, oh my God, let me get back to being Kratos. However, by the end of it, I felt like there were narrative reasons that were there that ended up kind of justifying it retroactively in my mind. So this ended up being a really, really strong experience. I think, honestly, more for gameplay, especially during the Kratos bits, than narrative. Although I do think, thematically speaking, I think the narrative here is actually a lot smarter than a lot of people are probably giving it credit for.
Well said. Dustin, what's going on to you? What are your high-level thoughts before we dive deeper?
I really enjoyed this game. I actually really enjoyed it a lot more than the first one, which I liked a lot, or the 2018, the reboot, we'll say. And I think what they were able to capture and do so effectively in this game was kind of, I said this a few weeks ago on Sacred Symbols, and I thought it was kind of dumb initially, but I think on it more, and I think it's an apt comparison, is that this is like such a strong expansion of the world from the first game. And it reminded me of between The Matrix and Matrix Reloaded, where you're hearing about a lot of things in the first game. You're hearing about Odin and Thor and this whole pantheon of gods and stuff. But they kind of held a lot of that close to their chest in the first game, leaving your mind to wander about what that will look like. What is it going to be like when you actually go to these locations? And they did a fantastic job just really opening up. The first game has like, what, less than 10 characters you even really interact with, I think, like a very small cast, and this one is much more expanded. I have to agree, though, that the pacing is not always on point with this game. I feel like some of the chapters are about 30 minutes too long, usually. Some of them go by really fast, and other times like, okay, let's move on to the next area. But overall, I thought the story was great. The characters were great. The performances were really particularly awesome. And of course, the combat. The combat was amazing. And it's funny because when I started playing it, it kind of felt like more of the same. But as I went on and played more of it, and then even going back and looking at the last game, like, whoa, they've done quite a bit to change things up. So overall, really had a great time.
To me, I feel like God of War Ragnarok's a pretty complicated game. Overall, so far, I've spent 37 hours with it. And like I said, just beat it a couple of hours ago. And I think the game is a little boring the first half of it, I would say. And I don't think the game lets you play it enough in the beginning. But by the time you get to the end and you're very proficient with the combat and things start getting worse and worse and Ragnarok gets closer and closer and there's just more and more violence and more craziness, you just by nature start fighting much more and the game becomes much funner. And it's really that simple to me. I feel like this game's too long. And it's weird to me that we are trying to extract so much blood out of the stone with games like this. Why couldn't this game be 20 really tight hours and really let you play the game? And maybe have another 10 hours of optional content or whatever, but I have this complaint about games that I even think are masterpiece level games like The Last of Us Part 2, where I'm like, this game's just, or Red Dead Redemption 2, where I'm like, this game's too long. Red Dead Redemption 2 is arguably 24 hours too long or something like that. But but in terms of The Last of Us Part 2, I think that could have been 5 to 10 hours shorter too. So that's a major complaint. And I think that I don't know why. No, I know why, but I wish that we would stop conflating value with how much time you spend with a game. Should rather be about the value of the game itself. During the VGAs, we didn't really talk about it on the show, but the game Sky was shown from Genova Chen. And it's funny because we had been talking about it on the show earlier. and talking about that game company's lineage and all of that. And that game is trying to do something right now. Whether or not it's going to work or not, or is working or not, is up to that's in the eye of the beholder. But it's not trying to give you this very metric proposition of value where it's like Sky is going to change your life and it's 20 hours long. It's like, no, it is what it is. And I think that devs should be a little more confident in just saying, well, and maybe they are saying that with this, it is what it is. But I just feel like a lot of games have bloat, and God of War Ragnarok is a sign of a game with bloat. But that said, I grew to like the game the more I played it towards more and more towards the end, especially when Odin gets more involved. I think Richard Schiff's performance is both disturbing as a West Wing fan and awesome as just a fan of video games. And we'll get into his character more deeply, and the complexity with Atreus and his relationship, and kind of the father, but kind of the father figure, and the combat and the dynamic between them. It's a story about peace, I think. And so it's got great performances. Like we said, I cried, not like shedding tears, but, teary eyed for sure. Several occasions in the game. And, really? That's power. I mean, that you can't deny that. So, but it's like I said on Sacred Symbols, and I'll leave it here for now. If God of War Ragnarok is the first video game you've played on PlayStation in, say, 10 years, it's probably the best game you've ever played in your life. You've probably never seen or experienced anything like it before. But unfortunately, it suffers from being like the 10th or 12th or 15th of these like very high quality AAA third-person action adventure games that PlayStation has released. And so it just feels less special. It just does. That's by virtue of playing it all so deeply. So I could imagine someone approaching this game and encountering and being like, this is absolutely bonkers how good this game is. But our expectations go up and up and up. And I don't think it reaches all of my expectations. And I think that at the end of the day, it's a PlayStation 4 game. And that's the important period to put on the end of it. And it does matter. And there's all sorts of different ways it tells you it's a PlayStation 4 game. It proves it over and over and over again, constantly. Sometimes so much that you can't help but acknowledge it. So that's how I feel about it at the top. Overall, great game. And highly recommended as well. I hope people check it out. Okay, so I want to ask this. This is a bit of a vague question, Hoeg, but I'm curious how you would answer this.
Okay.
What do you think this game is about? And I don't mean it's about Kratos and Atreus and their journey and the Allfather and Fimbulwinter and all this. But what is it about? Like, what is it trying to say? Because I think it's actually pretty heavy-handed in this way, and I'm wondering if I'm interpreting it the same way others are.
Well, that's interesting, because I think one of my main criticisms of the game is it lets its interest in Norse mythology and kind of capturing aspects of the Loki mythos and other things that we know are supposed to happen with whatever, Jormungandr and Thor and all these various things take over what should be a focus on plot and narrative and character. So to some extent, I find God of War Ragnarok to be a little bit like an encyclopedia entry about Loki. A lot of the things that you do just seem to be a reflection on that mythos. I think the overall story, if I'm thinking about how it ends, is probably about, it's certainly about prophecy and fate and the kind of usual Final Fantasy type of thing. And then I would argue that it's also a little bit about blood feuds and vengeance and putting down arms and what that means in when you've got especially a fated war at the end of a mythology. I think that's ultimately what I would say, but I really do feel like my criticism is that I don't think, in my opinion, in my experience with the game, it really coalesces all that well at the ending with Ragnarok. Obviously, the ending of the game is representative of, to my eyes, something like letting your kid go off to college and that kind of thing. But overall, I just don't think message-wise it coalesced, and I think it had at different points in time a lot of things that it wanted to say about a lot of things, in my opinion.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a really interesting insight. I love that analogy because I will say I was surprised by how happy it ends. They were really setting this thing up in my mind that for me, I was like, Kratos is absolutely going to die. Like, I can't.
You think so?
Yeah, and that's the way I felt playing it. I'm like, how can something horrible is going to happen? and maybe that's the PlayStation storytelling in me, like that you just kind of expect it. I was shocked by how it happened. Right, like there's not like some horrible, like, think about the end of The Last of Us or something. It's like it's the antithesis in some way of it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, even in the last game, there's the end. The ending of that game is like kind of it's like bittersweet, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you finally get to the mountain, you let her ashes go on the top of the mountain in Jotunheim, but there's also this like lingering feeling of like doom, because Kratos is going to die. That's what the prophecy says at the end.
All the giants are dead. Kratos is going to die. Winter is coming. I mean,
and then Loki will serve Odin. That was at the end of the first game. So yeah, it's interesting that they were able to kind of place that energy throughout the entire game, and then kind of subvert it in a way that thematically makes a lot of sense.
I think for me, watching as much movies and television and video games as I do, you introduce a prophecy, and I assume we're not just rolling with the prophecy, right? I assume that as a writer, you've got something going on. So it might be my cynicism or age or something in between, but I see Kratos is going to die, and you tell me that all 5 years ago, and I say, well, that's definitely what's not going to happen. That's how I read a prophecy like that.
Well, and Chris, I want to stay with you and kind of get your, I'll save what I was going to say for later. I want to stay on this for now. What do you think the theme is, or what do you think the game is trying to say?
I think God of War and God of War Ragnarok is way more about this than I think the first game was. But I think this game is about forgiveness, and not necessarily forgiving others, but like I think it's more about like internal, like self-forgiveness, because like the whole game, like even at the beginning of the game, Kratos is like, Freya is trying to kill Kratos, and he's like, I get it. We got to get away. Like, I understand. Like, I do not hold a grudge against this woman at all. It makes perfect sense why this is happening. And he goes and this is a consistent thing with him. He doesn't hold a grudge against anybody unless they straight up like interfere, which is very, very different from old Kratos. Kratos used to be think of the boat captain in the original God of Wars, who he just for no reason just massacres, like relentless for no fucking reason. And so it's a game about growth. It's a game about journey. It's about being better instead of just saying like, hey, I think we can all relate to this in some way. I think we know people like this, maybe. Or maybe we have been this person in at some point in our lives where it's like, oh yeah, I'll do better, and then you just don't. Or somebody's like, yeah, I'll get better, and it's like, and they don't. And I think it's just interesting the way this game plays with it, because for a long period throughout this game, Kratos is kind of fighting this natural he's fighting this urge of kind of violence and vengeance. Even to the point where it's like, I won't do that. And then he's pushed into it again. And it's almost like a relapse. Like when he beats Heimdall to death in like a really brutal way. Like not in comparison to the old games, of course, because the old games are ridiculously brutal, like cartoonishly so. And in some ways, I actually find the old games harder to take seriously because they're so hilariously. It's like Doom Eternal or whatever, where it's like the violence is so funny. But it's pretty brutal. Like he's smashing his head, and maybe that's a lot to do with the enhancement of graphics in this generation. That it's just like he's bashing his head in, he's like strangling him, and Mimir is on the side. He's like, yo, chill, like calm down. And you could tell that bothers him. That like that's a relapse, and it's like, God damn it, I fucked up, I failed, I like fell into the same ways. And even towards the end, when it becomes Ragnarok, when Ragnarok starts, and he's leading the general, he's like, we fight for vengeance. And it's not until like everything's kind of hitting the fan that he's like he opens up, and he's like, like, hey, listen. Specifically when he realizes the Midgardians are being used as like cannon fodder or like shielding, and Atreus is taking his words now. So like, shut yourself out to it. And he's like realizing only in that moment that it's like, wow, that's actually fucked. And it's at that point that he digs himself out of that self-fulfilling prophecy. I think it's about self-fulfilling prophecy and self-forgiveness and moving forward and just doing better instead of just saying you will. And I think it's really clever the way it does it, because it is really heavy-handed, but it's got this really nice kind of almost a layer of frosting over it with all the Norse mythology, with all of this fantasy action, with all of this, here's this high, this high fantasy story about Loki and Jormungandr and battles of gods. And then underneath it is this very, very human story, this very, very human theme that I feel like was just done a little bit. Like, I feel like there's a lot of Sony first parties, specifically, I think about The Last of Us Part 2, where the theme is clearly revenge is bad, and that's the whole theme. Yep. And it's such a... I just always felt like that was a first grade lesson in comparison, whereas like this is like a lot hard. Like it's a lot harder for people to forgive themselves than it is for, somebody to accept that revenge is bad. And I feel like they handled it in a good way. I don't know. I found myself like you, misty-eyed on multiple occasions. Because I was just like, damn, that's a really strong line. That's a really solid delivery. It's a really good performance. And it's relatable in a subsurface way. And I don't know, just I think it's a lot headier than it. And it's also cleverly set up. A lot of even just the surface level frosting layer. Like little things like the Odin twist where like his name is spelled differently as subtitles and there's like ravens in Tyr's room when you find him and like little things like that. It's really, there's a lot of attention to detail here that I feel like would give it a lot of value to play it again, especially when New Game Plus comes out. That's an obvious boon, but no, I loved it thematically. I thought it was great. But I'm also rambling, so.
No, it's all, first of all, I think that you and I are kind of similar in the sense that I think it's about this almost Calvinistic level of predetermination, right? Like predestination. They can, no matter how hard they try, they end up in the exact places that the prophecy says they're going to be. And they keep telling themselves it's not the prophecy, it's choice. It's not the prophecy, it's us. And you do realize at the end that it really was them, that everything changes. Kratos is seen being worshipped as a peaceful god.
Right.
In that painting, which is awesome. And they finally, like you say, break the cycle. But the one thing I think...
Wait a minute, Colin. Yeah. That's also a prophecy. Like, this is one of the issues I have with the finale of the game, right? That wardrobe's always there.
That's... So, right. So it's always... So all he had... That's a good point, right? So he had to just look... Oh, because she says something earlier, right? That like that one's not ready yet or something when he's... Don't look at that one. And they talk about how she trusts that he won't look.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's implied. That's the same wardrobe, right?
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
But I mean, that is... So this is one of the issues. I like God of War. Like I said, 7 and 8 is not a bad game to me. But I think that things get muddled. They want to say things and they just wind up with places where it's like, yeah, you want to show me that he made a change. I think the fundamental mechanism for showing me that he made a change can't be a prophecy. It can't be a future-looking wardrobe because we have just either tried to disclaim that fate does these things or that prophecy actually can manifest them. So I struggle with that ending beat because I don't know whether we're supposed to be in favor of breaking fate or whether I can cry in happiness and joy because, fate is now on my side or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That is pretty deep. I don't think I analyze it even that deep at all.
I'm a weirdo.
No, I think that's good stuff. I mean, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I read that differently. I didn't read that as because when my interpretation was the back of the wardrobe wasn't done literally because it's not necessarily a prophecy because we've established that prophecies aren't necessarily real. The ending beat is to showcase, I think, when he's looking at that mural, it's about a path forward. Because that's all prophecy is. It's like it's the culmination of different paths, and those paths are made by the choices that we make. And so my reading of that ending was here is a path forward. And you can visualize that path now. You see it, and something about seeing it makes it possible. It makes you feel like it's like, okay, this is a new kind of in the same vein that like self-fulfilling prophecy is something that kind of you tell yourself and it's very vivid. It's like you feel like you're locked in these cycles over and over again. And You can see that very clearly. And because you can see it very clearly, you end up stumbling through it. He even says at the end of the game, it's, what did you see? And he says, a path. And it's not necessarily that he's destined to be worshipped as a god of peace or that it's bound to happen, but for him to know that it's possible, for him to know that others can see him in that way and paint a mural like that, as opposed to like his constant, even in the first game where he's on that, I can't remember what it's called. It's like a vase or like a vase in Tyr's temple. And he's like, it's from Greece, I think. I'm pretty sure. And it's Kratos like standing on a mound of bodies and he's like screaming. It's like the only way that people can possibly perceive him at that point.
Interesting.
And I always felt it was like a reflection of outside perspective and a almost like a not too on the nose way of other characters or other people around someone being like, hey, we believe in you. We believe you can do this. And here's what that might look like. So go and try. That's kind of how I read it.
Yeah,
no,
thematically speaking.
I like these conversations because you could see I struggle with, we spend the whole game saying, as Colin said, it's choice. It's not what we're destined to. And then I have trouble taking, now we've got a new destiny and fate. And that should be a moment of joy or a moment of completion. I don't feel that.
In other words, it's just another unknown, just like the unknowns we broke. That is, you guys both have interesting perspectives here. Here's the one thing, and Dustin, we'll kick it back to you because we haven't heard from you in a while, is the one thing that I'm curious what you guys feel about this is that the game is very human.
Yeah.
But they're not humans. And that to me is a little bit, it's not immersion breaking. It just doesn't feel as powerful. You guys, and by you guys, I mean those people, you're gods. You see eternities and have amazing powers. And yes, you love and you lose and doing all of that kind of stuff. In fact, Faye says in one of the flashbacks, the culmination of love is grief, which is an amazing quote. And it's true. In other words, you set yourself up for, unless you die first, right? Like you're going to experience all of these different things that are going to break your heart, but you would have never loved if you had tried to avoid those things. But you're gods and you're giants and you're elves and you have all these supernatural powers. You're not human, right? It's to me that there's a dissonance there, as opposed to someone expressing their love in a really human way. And it's like, well, we have 70 or 80 years and our 9 to 5s and we grind it out and all that. It's just different. The context is different. And that to me, I think is kind of where it's God of War. So, I mean, it is going to be what it is. But when you try to take God of War and then make it that, it's very powerful, but it doesn't feel real. It feels like I'm observing still something supernatural and eternal in some way, because it's Odin, it's Thor, it's not Colin and Hoeg and Dustin and Chris, So Dustin, what do you think the game is about? What do you have to say?
I have two thoughts, but I want to respond to what you just said, because I actually feel almost the opposite, that them being gods and experiencing the same issues are showing the irony of godhood, which I don't know a lot about Greek and Norse mythology, but that does seem to be a reoccurring theme. It's like, man, for the gods being all powerful, they kind of suck, don't they? And so I don't know, like, to me, that just makes sense. It's like, yeah, it's like the gods constantly screw up. And even though it seems like they should have these perfect lives, it's actually always quite the opposite. So I can understand the immersion breaking aspect of it, but I don't know, it fit the mold to me. As far as the themes of the game, I want to add to this the idea of destiny, which I think is obviously probably the prevailing theme that you guys covered pretty extensively. But ultimately, what I would think we can add into that is this idea of the cyclical nature of the family, which we see throughout this game over and over again. And in the first game as well, but we see Kratos, who's dealing with this idea of his destiny to die. And we also see how he's trying to avoid that. And he's trying to keep this pristine relationship with his son. But the ironic part about it is you can see all the ways that he's failing, how they've come to fruition in the people around him. So there's this conflict between him and Atreus about how controlling he is. And literally right in front of him, he sees the story of Freya and Balder, who is the ultimate control freak and lost that entire relationship because of it. Right? And I think this game also piles onto this idea with the relationship between Thor and Odin and Thrud with that, where it's like this cyclical relationship of bad daddy complex, right? Where it's like, my dad sucked. I don't want to be like that. I'm going to be better than him. But then ultimately you just kind of make the exact same mistakes. And Kratos, who's done a pretty good job in turning the page, as you guys have said, it's a constant battle for him to not turn back to his old ways, right? So I don't know if there's like a nice tidy way that I can summarize that theme together in a sentence, but I do find overall the dynamics of the family and breaking the mold to be extremely prevalent throughout.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting in the sense that you can get something so deep out of this, I guess, right? Like it's a nice sign that regardless of your interpretation of it, that God of War can emit something deep for you, or I guess for me, something so deep that I don't really take to it as much as if I felt it was human. Because to me, when I look at gods having human problems, and it's up to your point, it's like, I think that is pathetic. It's weird. Don't you have something more profound to tell me? In some sense, that's why you can understand Odin's, in some weird way, like Odin's quest for actual knowledge and truth. He says at the end, don't you want to be something and do something? It's almost a commentary, if you're right, Dustin, about your examination of the gods and their almost quaint humanity, is he was trying to break that mold by finding some sort of actual answer, although obviously he was completely destructive in doing it. And one of the things I didn't know, because I don't know anything about mythology in any way either, and I'm also not interested in it. It's just something that doesn't speak to me. It's like learning ancient fan fiction, right? It's like, I don't need to know all these intricacies. It's fine. Jupiter's a planet to me, but one of the interesting things that I thought came to fruition throughout the game through these various godlike characters were the performances. And I wanted to ask you guys about what some of your favorite performances were and some of the characters that stood out to you, because the one thing that I think PlayStation always nails in their first party is production. And this game is no exception. I think that they're really setting a very high bar with God of War, The Last of Us, Horizon, Uncharted, these kinds of games. And so this fits the bill entirely. And I think this is the stuff that separates their games from everyone else right now.
Yeah.
In addition to some of the gameplay quirks as well. So Hoeg, let's go back to you. Do you want to point out any characters or any particular performances that you enjoyed in the game?
As someone who didn't love Atreus in 2018, I thought he had a significantly improved performance in 2022. One of the aspects of the game that I like, even though I think it moves the balance and the pacing around a little bit more than I would prefer, is that I think they were deeply invested in the Loki story. And I would argue more than the Kratos story, certainly at points. And I think, had you asked me from 2018 whether the kid would be up to the challenge, I would have maybe said, and I think he did. I think he did a good job on this. And certainly his interactions, especially in Asgard, he pairs well with Thrud. I like those performances. And to me, that's actually a little bit more than Kratos, who's pretty staid in this one. So I tend to like Atreus the most, although I think, as you pointed out, Odin's an actual movie and TV star, so he does quite well.
You're a West Wing person, right?
I've seen it. Yeah. I mean, I would not describe myself as a West Wing person, but you couldn't go to law school in certain years a few decades ago without watching West Wing.
Oh yeah, 1999 to 2005 or so. It's the when it was on, and then after that, I mean, that's when I discovered it. And I asked that just because, and I don't think you two, Dustin and Chris, are West Wing people, but I love the West Wing. I've seen the West Wing probably all the way through 4 times, and Richard Schiff is a major character in that, and it's distracting. Actually. It is
distracting. I have that problem too. One of the things that I was really distracting for me, and this might be unique to me, is that Sif was Elena Fisher. And I'm like, oh, you're killing me. I just can't remove
so
from
funny
that.
you say that. I'm so bad at identifying actors, and that was the only one in the game that I also said. I was like, I looked it up immediately. I paused it. I was like, oh, it's Emily Rose, because she's also in another show I love, Jericho. So I just know her voice. And so
as soon as it comes up, I was like, oh, that's Lita Fisher. It's like, oh, you can't. That's a major role. Like, you can mess around with some of the people, and it's like, oh no, that one jumped out at me. But I think you guys made the right point, which is that they advanced the ball from 2018 to this kind of magnum opus of just cast of hundreds. And I think that's part of the problem with the pacing, is if you're going to stick with that kind of one-shot approach, you have to make all these kind of excuses to go get information. So Odin will just show up, or we have to give Atreus a full trip to Asgard to try to introduce this whole plot line and that kind of thing. So that's one of those areas where I think it's an interesting choice. I think they were a little bit hamstrung when a cutscene could have done something that they spend 3 hours doing in like 10 minutes maybe. So I think that's a problem. But performance-wise, I can't disagree with anything. I think there wasn't anybody that felt super out of place.
No, I agree. And yeah, it's so funny because for people that don't know, his character, Toby on The West Wing, he's like the communications director and the speechwriter for the president. And so he's probably like one of the biggest characters throughout the entire run of the show, but he plays a very sardonic and dour and down, but kind of funny dude in the show. And it felt like Odin. And it's funny because I was reading that they wanted him specifically for this role, and they identified him somehow for this role. And it was his son, who apparently is a huge nerd, that was like, you absolutely.
It's big time.
He didn't. Yeah. You can understand that these guys, like, I think Al Pacino authentically was surprised when he walked out on stage during the VGAs and
Did he have any idea where he was?
Right, like, and clearly didn't rehearse or anything like that. But it's like there are people that don't really get it, and you can imagine he goes on this call. His agent's kind of trying to explain it to him. I think he talks to his son and says he's going to Santa Monica Studio, and I think his son told him before he even went, like, no matter what they say to you, you absolutely understand that this is something you need to do, right? And
this is big time,
right?
Yeah, I was like the stories of kids like that, right? The Viggo Mortensen's kid that says, "No, Lord of the Rings is a big deal. Go take that."
Yeah, it's funny and it's good and it's really good advice. But I couldn't help when I was fighting Odin at the end, and I liked those last boss fights; they were fun. But it's so funny, like, he's the one saying all of this shit, right? Like, all this, and it's like you could just picture Richard Schiff in the VO booth going off, and it's just so great. So for West Wing fans, I know that's going to be something that's distracting. I wanted to shout out a couple characters as I kick it over to you, Chris. I thought Mimir was obviously great.
Yeah,
with Alistair Duncan doing a really good version of this, and again, not being familiar with the mythology, I didn't know. I guess I just didn't really know that all of everyone is represented somewhat accurately in their mythos and all
this.
Yeah,
twists on all the stories. But
right, exactly. And then I also liked Danielle Basutti, I think her name is, as Freya, and then Ben Pendergrast as Tyr. I have an embarrassing question about Tyr, though. Was he Odin the entire, or like compromised the whole game?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, because I that wasn't clear to me. Like, I didn't know if I missed something where it, like, he was compromised.
After the fact, they have a series of conversations that you can hear about, was it the whole time, and I should have known, and they talk about the entirety of the period where you had.
Oh yeah, I just missed that, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
There's a side quest at the end where you can find somebody, the real Tyr.
It's the Spoilercast. We can say
it's a Spoilercast.
You approach that really, really carefully.
I was thinking, like, maybe Colin would want to find out that you can find the real Tyr, but it's too late now.
No, it's fun. I think once. I don't think this. Well, let me say this: if depending on the game, if it was a Horizon or something where I was much more invested in the story, I wouldn't want to know anything. But I'm really not that invested in this, especially because it's over. I mean, at least this arc is over. But Chris, let's stick with you. Are there any performances that you particularly liked?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't need to talk about Christopher Judge because I think he did an amazing job again. Because it's just,
and he did an amazing job talking about himself
for 20 minutes.
His experience for 20 minutes.
And Al Pacino's just stood there like crying silently.
I know, that was the craziest thing.
What a surreal. Oh man, but no, I think I think Mimir is just so good. Like as like there are a lot of examples throughout games where in-game chatter is very, very annoying. And by the way, even in this game, specifically during the Atreus bits where he's like, well, I guess it's just me climbing a fuck. It's Forspoken shit again, where it's like, I'm climbing a fuck. What are you doing, Atreus? You're climbing.
You take that back right now. I've played the demo.
You're climbing a wall. You're about to go to Asgard, and you're by yourself. What am I doing? And it's like, shut the fuck up. But but with I don't know, with Kratos and Freya and Mimir, or like specifically the Kratos bits, I found like the best, because I think like Mimir is such a great addition to the formula for this game. Like whenever you are exploring, there's always something for him to say, and it's always delivered in a really fun and in character way. It's grounded in the universe. It's also interesting. I really like Norse mythology. I like mythology in general. Like I'm not like huge into it, but necessarily I don't study it. But I know a lot about like, you know, Loki and Jormungandr and ancient Norse and all this stuff. And it was cool to just hear these really, really niche stories, like stuff that I remember from a really, really long time ago when I was like super nerdy about it, being told in this way, in this world, in this story. In this context, because I think one of the best things that this game does is the way it plays with Norse mythology. Little things like, because in Norse mythology, you know, Fenrir and Jormungandr are Loki's children, and Fenrir exists in the beginning, and also he's a dog, so it's like, how the fuck did, like, what is it? How does that work? How is the snake this kid's son? And then you learn through the game, it's like, it's not literal children. It's these are the creations of Loki. And that's so interesting to me. Like, I love the way it's almost like an interpretation, almost like a game of telephone that happens, where it's like you could see this being the real story, and over years and years and years, it gets like twisted into what we know now as Norse mythology, as like, oh yeah, these are the children of Loki. And it's like, well, technically. And I don't know, just little things like that, and the way they use it to kind of reinforce their themes, and the way they use it to reinforce their characters. I think Mimir is like the perfect kind of epitome of that goal. But beyond that, I don't know if I think Odin is objectively like one of the most interesting performances in the game. I just think the way, because he's portrayed so differently than what Odin is usually presented as. Odin is typically just bigger Thor. Typically,
right, and this is supposed to be accurate, right? Like, this is actually what he's supposed to be like in the myth, right? Which is just like a dude.
It's his obsessions are accurate, but it's not. He's more of a brute force guy in the mythology, and you can interpret that. Again, there's interpretations there where, like, you know, he destroyed his family, or he destroyed, you know, so much, but not physically. He's just manipulating, and it's just fun the way they're able to keep true to the Norse mythology while still having fun with their own characters and doing their own interpretations. Odin is, in this game, unlike any form of Odin I've ever seen, and yet somehow entirely faithful. And that's super cool. That's like a really difficult thing to do. And granted, it's the, you know, whether or not it's difficult, I mean, they chose to do a Norse game series, but you know, it's still impressive nevertheless. And I think Odin was just so interesting, like his vocal resonance and just the way he tries to talk his way out of everything, and even the relationship between him and his family. It's so fascinating the way that he's always, every time Odin interacts with one of his family members, he's telling them to go away. Every single time. It's like, all right, Thor, don't you have something to beat up or something? It's like, all right, hey, Thrud, I don't have time. Like, hey, Sif, I'm busy. And then here's this kid who comes in after killing his grandkids. Why is Odin spending so much time with him? The hell is that? The family's like jealous of that almost. And I thought that was like so. I thought that was so interesting. I don't know. I think
because he's so single-minded to just get the answers no matter what, I guess.
Yeah. He's totally. But but I just love the way the characters interact, and the dynamics just make total sense. Like, it makes sense that they would have all this resentment, not only because of what Loki did and what his dad did, but because of how much time he is getting with Odin. It's hilarious. If looking in from the outside, it's like, what the fuck? We're literally your family. Where are you?
By the way, speaking of all their family, is Thor an alcoholic in the myth?
Yes.
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
He is a drunken he's a typical drunken like Viking kind of character. And he goes around and he's way worse. He's significant. I'm fairly certain most of these gods were rapists in some way, although they cleverly don't touch on that. Probably for the betterment of the story.
Yeah, we don't need to get into the Viking.
But even that again, like it's these are horrible characters. Like all of these characters are terrible. Like they're terrible people. But what I love about it is there's still that moment at the end where he's fighting with Thor, and he's broken up, and he's fighting, and he's on the ground. He's like, "Don't you know what I've done?" And then Kratos is like, "Yes, but what will you do now?" I thought that was that pierced me. That was like fucking whoa. And it wasn't even like necessarily like particularly deep writing. It wasn't even necessarily that it was like, unthinkable. Like it's just, it fit that moment so perfectly. And again, that's the theme. It's like, yeah, you've done all of this shit. And maybe you feel like you are set in these ways. And maybe it's the expectation of everybody around you that sets you in those ways. And maybe you continue to do it because it's comfortable. But what will you do now? I think that's so fucking dope. Like, that's such a cool thing to be in a game about Norse mythology and just like beating the shit out of zombies and dragons and fucking whatever. It's so, I don't know. I was really impressed by it. I know we just got off on a tangent, but
no, it's totally good, dude. I don't mind that at all. I think I guess maybe it's a little foolish and ignorant of me to think this, but when Kratos was saying that to him, I was wondering, like, is Odin gonna not do it? Like, is he going to change? But of course, like, you need, I guess, your antagonist, and he remains that way.
You need your static characters.
Yeah,
the world can be full of dynamic characters, but you need Frieza in there.
Well said. Hoeg, you were going to say something?
Oh no, all I was going to say is that ending beat is still interesting because you still have as part of the prophecy Loki with the orb. I mean, it's very. Like I said, my biggest problem with it is it's just somewhat muddled on this kind of main conceit of fate. But I'm loving this conversation because I love to be opened up to things and try to find, more joy in the things that I like. So I'm really enjoying the positivity. I also want to change my performance answer because I actually really liked Angrboda.
She was great.
I forgot she was great as well. She was charming.
Definitely.
So I'm going to go with Angrboda.
Yeah, Angrboda's great. Didn't need to ride on a yak for 7 hours.
Did we? No, we had to pick some fruit.
You got to slow the game. I mean, these are the things.
That was the worst part. That was the worst part, and for me anyway.
No, I agree with you. And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dawson.
Well, just you're picking these fruit for fucking ever, and then you're like, okay, we're gonna wrap this up, and then she says, hey, I need some paint. Let's go get me some paint.
Let's go get
paint.
You
go down into this fucking cave.
Sherman Williams. Yeah.
And you help her get the paint. And then you just end the level. So I was like, what was the point of that? What was the point of the paint? There's no dialogue in there.
Slow the game down and add time to it.
It's really annoying, but that boss fight was really cool. Like, I thought that boss fight with the pot was like so interesting.
Yeah.
No, but
I liked her effects too, like the color effects when she'd fight. Very pretty. But you're totally right. You guys are right. I know it sounds. It's so. Listen, these parts are added because they're like, we got to slow the game down. Like the game is going, it's going too quick.
Bloat is the right word for this, right? Because it's like you have that, and I thought that was really interesting for like the first 45 minutes, and then it just keeps going. And then you think about what you did in the game, and you get to the end point where the mask is going to break, and you say, did we really need 3 or 4 trips to get mask parts? And the answer is they want to introduce you to these characters. They get enamored with some of their cleverness, Chris, which I think you're right on in terms of here's how Jorgenlander comes to being. Here's how Fenrir works. They're clever, but I think they sometimes fall in love with that cleverness a little bit too much. And so those aren't directly impacting your narrative flow. And if I had a big complaint the most about like what arcs happen in this game is that there's a point in time really right before the Fenrir stuff and before the other stuff where you can see the arc. You've got the horn. You can see how Ragnarok is going to happen. You think you're going in that direction, and it's like we've got a magic wolf on the loose, and we've got to get the sun and moon wolves, and we got to set up the stories that we have from Loki and the other prophecies that we've set up and things like that. And I have to admit that I wasn't crying over this game, and this might be my own personal problem. I might just be broken. You never know.
You sociopath.
Yes, I'm a sociopath. It's American Psycho over here while I play God of War. And I just get to that point where it's like, let's just go. Let's just go. And I fully admit, as I said at the top of this, you get to that point where if your psychology, if your thought process is like, they've overstayed, I want to get to Ragnarok. I want to get done with this. That's where I arrived. And then to Colin's point, I have problems with the inciting event. It's Fimbulwinter. We know the first 12 hours of the game are why are we doing this? Why are we going up this elven tower to get to that prophecy wardrobe? Yeah, we want to know more information, but it's not terribly detailed. Why is Atreus trying to go and get Tyr? Why is that important? It just never felt like, boom, this is why we're on an adventure. It just kind of meanders until it starts coalescing. And so those are my bugaboos on this stuff, is that I never felt like I had a reason to be playing it early on. I really enjoyed some of the middle areas. They did have a Shaggy Dog kind of feel. Everything that was an hour was 3. You go and you get a spear, could have been faster. You go and fight a dog, could have been faster. And Colin, I agree with you so much on this that you deliver that exact same game in a tight 20 hours. I will play it twice. I promise, Sony. I promise.
Yeah, I think I think they could have really tightened it up for sure.
That's what I feel is missing. I think there's a great game in there that needs an editing pass. I mean, that's the truth. And I know you don't put things on the cutting room floor because they're so damn expensive to make in video game land. But I really feel like Sony has evidenced in a number of games now that they have a problem with editing. And Last of Us Part 2 is a great example.
It's funny because I haven't played it yet at the time we're recording, but I just think the canary in the coal mine about why Santa Monica was so cognizant of runtime is because of look at what's happening in the Callisto Protocol. Not whether it's good or bad, but people are flipping out. It's 8 hours, 10 hours. I'm paying $70 for this. It's like, dude, imagine an 8 or 10 hour AAA sci-fi game. It could be linear. You might only play it once, but I think that you can find value in that. And I think Sony is maybe doing the smart thing by saying, let's just make a lot of content, which is what they do. We'll have almost, as I said earlier, Horizon-like side quests, which don't feel quite at home here. And we're going to make it so that the game can't be beaten quickly. Because I was reading How Long to Beat, and they were saying, even if you mainline it and just do the main quest, you're not beating this game in quicker than 15, maybe 20 hours. That's I
would be impressed by a 15-hour mainline run.
Me too. I always look at that site, and I'm always amazed about how people... I feel like I'm always slow. Every single time someone says on PSN profiles, here's how long it takes to get a platinum trophy. Here's how long it takes to beat the game. Here's how long it takes to do this campaign. It's always wrong. But I think it's because I play slow. But
I'm a walker, right? You're going to show me AAA graphics. I get into an ice cave and I'm like, damn, we're going to walk through this area. That's just what I do. So that's where some of my slowness comes from.
Oh my God, certainly. I'm running the entire time. I'm running.
You're that guy. See?
Yeah, because most of my time I'm thinking oh, this is an open world. I'll see this again. I don't have to slow down because it'll be there. And if I want to look at it, I'll look at it when I got time.
I think my mindset is I like to pretend I'm an old school E3 presenter.
Oh yeah,
with the slow pans.
Yeah. I do the camera moves, up to the crystal wall, and so it's I make little movies.
No, I totally feel that. I love the old slow pan, especially in that 30 frames per second. It looked beautiful. But I do feel like there's just something to be said about the very clinical nature of the way this game is constructed. And I'll say this, and I've said it in the past, and I don't mean it as an insult because I think Eric Williams was saying it because of a learning disability or something that he does, the way he writes. But he said that he wrote it beat for beat, I think, in a spreadsheet. And I think you can tell. I just think that it doesn't. There are parts of it that are just very sudden. There are parts of it where I'm like, that was really quick. That whole arc, a change of feeling, an affection for a character. Some things happen really quickly. Then some things are really, really drawn out.
Sif comes out of nowhere.
Right.
Exactly. That's the one that jumps into my head. Sif switching sides is like, what?
Yeah. Which is a total, it's a crazy part of the game. And I just look at it and I wonder, how clinical was it? Did you guys see this game and said, we need him to shimmy here. We need this to slow down. We need this animation. And so on and so forth. It adds hours to the game. And I don't understand why people think that that's you being treated well. I just think that you have to justify the time you're spending. And I do wonder if this game would have gotten the same chance that it's gotten if it wasn't God of War, in the sense that I do think it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, but people are holding on for that expectation. And at least I was. And the second half of the game is much stronger, I think, than the first half of the game as well. But let's move on. There are other things that we should talk about.
Oh, wait, Colin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I didn't get to talk about characters.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dustin. I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
I want to shout out to Brock and Sindri in this game.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because,
Oh, yeah.
dude, so I think they're great characters in God of War 2018, for sure. But they really ultimately serve the purpose of glorified shopkeepers, which they play a part in the story that's important, for sure. But they're not essential or core. Maybe I'm misremembering something, but I feel like their impact in this game was much, much more significant. And I think that where the writing really shines through here is that it's risky to take your comic relief characters and make them do serious stuff and make it feel believable. And I feel like particularly at the end of the game with Sindri is really, really well done. And it's interesting in that I saw people that don't like that the relationship between Sindri and Atreus is not resolved. And I love that about it. Yeah. I like that there is no resolution, because sometimes that fucking happens. Sometimes, Atreus didn't mean to bring somebody into his home that would kill his brother, but it happened. And you know what? Maybe that's just a wound that will not heal. And that happens sometimes. And I don't know. It was an area of the game that I found quite believable in a way. Yeah. And I like that we see a character who is this really polite. He's cleaning the table. He's somewhat soft-spoken, who is put to the test in an extreme situation, both in terms of Ragnarok happening around him and the person he's closest to being fucking murdered in front of him. And we see this completely different side of him that is so incredibly different, but at the same time, incredibly believable as well, based on the scenario around him. So overall, I didn't expect going into this game that I would be impacted by those two characters and what happened, but I was shocked. In particular, at the end, I think that probably if you finish the credits and then you just stop playing, then you missed out on the funeral scene. Yeah, which I also thought was, I wish that would have been the actual end so people didn't miss it, because that funeral and the way that he shows up at the end and like I said, the non-resolution, I love that aspect of it.
Yeah. No, that was a standout moment for me too. So I like that little narrative rhyming beat of him trying to guess the riddle and finally getting it at the funeral. I thought that was cute and cool. Yeah. But yeah, no, that was a strange thing when I saw people not understanding why, like in a matter of like maybe less than a day or he hasn't forgiven you yet. It's like, of course not. What? Also, that I think exemplifies some of the theme again, where I think a lot of that anger, like clearly, I think on some level, Sindri understands that it's not Atreus' fault and it's not Kratos' fault. But I think he is also understanding, like he robbed his brother of an afterlife when he brought him back to life the first time. Like that's a whole beat that's like in the game where it's like he's not he doesn't get to go to fucking this. He's not going to be he doesn't got any of that. He's just gone, dead as dead can possibly be. And so I feel like that anger is largely self-inflicted. He to the point where he even goes and isolates himself and he just comes back rageful. He's like angry, he's furious, and there's no reasoning with him because that anger that's inward anger manifest outward. Yeah. That's especially that's what I got at the funeral, at least, like when he's like looking, when Kratos puts his hand on his shoulder and he's like Brock was, and then he interrupts him and he looks up, but it's not even necessarily angry anymore. It's just like tired.
Mm-hmm.
And he just leaves. I think that's so fucking real. It's crazy. And
there's a level of self-loathing to it, right? In some sense, because he realizes that it was something he did in the first place that was maybe he thought somehow would be rectified in a future that he could figure out, you know?
Yeah.
That's interesting stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up, Dustin, because they are great performances. And I was talking earlier in the episode about how we get kind of a happy outcome, or at least a content outcome in a lot of ways, but not with him. Although I didn't see that funeral scene. I saw that there was a secret ending or some sort of ending you could find, but I did not see it yet. So Hoeg, it looked like you might have wanted to say something.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because, again, I think it depends on what perspective you're coming from, right? My mantra is always reasonable minds can differ on this stuff. So the Sindri plotline for me was repetitious of where we started with Freya and Baldur. And so I look at this story again. I'm really enjoying hearing your takes on this because in my head, it's got a lot of thoughts and it kind of meanders around them throughout the game. And Sindri, I can totally understand somebody being upset about at the end because you guys like it, or at least as far as I've heard. I don't want to put things in people's mouths as a kind of slice of life verisimilitude. That's how things happen sometimes, type of feel. And I get that, but I don't think God of War Ragnarok is telling that kind of story. That it's generally telling a more operatic version of these things about forgiveness, laying down arms and family and cycles and all these things. And I think leaving that kind of unfinished feels bad, man, as the slang goes, right? And so I think it's interesting because we started this game covering somebody vengeful, angry, lost somebody, not connecting with the person that they know. Freya knows that it was her or him when that game starts. You have that kind of irrationality. Sindri's got a different one, but I think it's a similar kind of concept that you're going over again. And to me, at this point, I'm just going to be honest with my tilts and biases, right? We get to the credits, and I'm feeling like Ragnarok was a bit anticlimactic. I'm feeling that meandering nature. I'm feeling kind of the shaggy dogness. And I'm just like, I don't have a great deal of trust at that point in time while I'm playing that all of this is fully fleshed out or thought out. And so that's my tilt. That's what I'm bringing to the table when that all happens. And I say, well, I think it's cool that he got the kill. I think it's cool to reflect on what that means and whether that's a good thing. And there's like a lot of like, that's an interesting beat at the end. But it doesn't feel like a fully told story with that particular aspect of those relationships, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting to say. And I love that we all have different opinions on the game. So although I think we all like it, so that's good. I don't ever want to put a gun to someone's head and make them talk about something that's truly bad. No,
I enjoyed my time with it, I'm not the biggest Brock and Sindri fans. Like it wasn't my style of humor from 2018. So that they rolled in, they definitely had a bigger part. Yeah. And I really did like Atreus going off with Sindri. I like that early on. I think that's the first time you realize you're going to play as Atreus. Although I think the menus gave it away a little bit.
Yeah, they did. Well, let's talk about that. I heard the heaving sigh from Chris, I think.
When I said menus?
No, about Atreus, I think. We'll talk about the menus too. That's one of the worst parts of the game, no doubt. But let's talk about playing the game. It is a game, and I think it shines most in my mind when you're playing it. It's one of those games that creates moments, and I love that kind of thing where you're not even really intentionally doing a lot of the shit you're doing. You're not button mashing, but you're just going about your business, but it creates a cool moment because then you knock a dude in the air and then you happen to throw an axe and it comes back and hits someone, and an arrow strikes someone who's going down. And you didn't really time it, but you can tell that a lot of very smart gameplay designers made it so that you're always feeling satisfied with the way things are going. There's a lot of magnetism in that way with the combat. You can even tell the way characters are stationed around each other. I think the lock-on system actually hurts the game a little bit. I think playing it unlocked on, especially when there are multiple characters, is really interesting. At an Odin fight, for instance, if you're locked on, when he puts the area of effect spell down and you have to like run away. If you're locked on, it's a huge problem, So I liked how the game challenged you to play it in a much more arcadey way.
Yeah.
And the introduction of the new weapon was cool, although I barely used it outside.
I love Draupnir.
Oh, so you like the spear? Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was game changing for me. I love that thing.
Was that the spoiler, by the way, that IGN? Because I only could think of two things.
I got it ready.
No,
which
this
was
spoil-
talk
I
about
thought it was
it.
either
Yeah.
Brock dying or that you got the spear, because I remember it being the big. As I remember, the big spoiler in the
Blades of
2008
Chaos.
version was getting the blades. Right.
Yeah, that was the big
Right.
it was.
Here,
I mean,
I
yeah,
can read
Dustin's
it.
got
I got the thing. This is going to put us off course, but that's okay because it's worth saying. IGN, in a post for Podcast Beyond, talking about sitting down to talk to the game's director, the headline is, "The big tier twist was hidden in plain sight the whole game."
Oh my god.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, that sucks.
That's so crazy because that's a really transformative. That's like when everything kind of like fucking gets upended in like a really difficult to predict way. Like that. That's not something you would naturally. I mean, I'm sure some people, if they're really, really, really in tune with Norse mythology, might have predicted that. But you got to be fucking.
I wasn't in tune with it enough, but I will tell you I was carrying a little weight on my shoulders from whatever it is, smoke and metal, and we're just going to go show up in Svartalsheim, and there's Tyr in a cave we find. I was like, okay. I mean, the pathway of logic that gets you into Tyr at the start, I was like, all right, we're suspending disbelief for this fantasy video game.
Well, I found him
So-
frustrating actually, just because I was like, "What are you doing?"
No, right? Yeah, exactly. Because he's a bitch.
Right.
He's
We're
like
angry at him the
'cause
whole game.
He cowers constantly. He doesn't fight, and it's like, what are you doing? You suck. And then there's a good reason. I love that. I love that. That makes that
No, I
that
think
is
the twist
smart
rectified
design.
some things for me. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying like I had issues with the whole Tyr kind of
Right,
gambit,
no,
and then it's like. Okay.
I think this game does a lot of that. I feel like this game does a lot of like they'll set you on a. There are some things obviously that I think that yak part is too long. I think Atreus could stand to shut up a little bit when he's on his own, because you could tell that we don't have Mimir here, so we've got to have voices, and it's like
Yeah, you gotta
don't.
have exposition.
You
for
really
sure.
don't.
Yeah.
I trust
agree.
me, you really don't. And there are little things like that, but generally speaking, like, you know, I wasn't thrilled to be playing as Atreus. Like, I just didn't find his gameplay satisfying at all. How many?
He's like Legolas. He's flipping around the whole time.
Yeah, but so is every other PlayStation character at this point. like, all right, Aloy with the bow and arrow. Okay, Ellie with the bow and arrow. Jin Sakai with the bow and arrow. Give me a fucking break. Let me play.
He does a little bit more than the bow and arrow.
He does, but he has. That's the thing. It's like Kratos is the only character in the first party that acts the way Kratos does. He is a barbarian. He rips people apart. He beats them to death with their own arms. He snaps their necks off. It's awesome. That werewolf execution where you drag
You
their
grab the
jaw
jaw?
down
That
their
was
body.
a bit much. You don't think that's a bit much on the
That is-
werewolves? I was
that's
like,
dope.
hello.
That is
Yeah.
dope as hell.
Yeah, it's good
I
shit.
love it. But
Good shit.
but like that's the only
I'm the
and
old man.
then so when you're Atreus and you're like, I'm the rogue, pew pew pew, and it's like, fuck me, god damn it, you were better as the square button. Like you are not, and then he hits people with the bow, and it's like, God, man, this is not an axe. I am
I think
not
all they needed
feeling-
on. I would have liked to
anything.
see more of the finishing the R3s for Atreus. I think he only has like the one, and he needed a few more. I think.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
they're also a little repetitive. Like they need to do more.
Yeah,
of
there
those.
could be more. But there's even a part with Atreus where, like, you get. There's a part in the game where you get. I can't remember the name of the sword, but it's Freyr's sword.
Yeah, what is it?
Daphne.
Daphne Ismelda.
I can't remember.
I'll look it up. Go ahead.
I can't remember the name of the sword, but you get that sword, and I remember being like, "Oh hell yeah, I get to cleave into people." And no, it's just this kind of auto turret that just kind of
It's a singing
happens.
sword. It's like Roger Rabbit. It's great.
It's cute, and I get it. I get it narratively. It makes perfect sense in the world, but I'm just like, it just cemented the fact to me. It's like, wow, I really hate playing as Atreus in this.
Ingrid.
Ingrid, yeah.
Ingrid.
I
To take us
really
even-
can't stand it.
To take us even further afield, and then I will stop interrupting. You said Freyr, and one thing I wanted to ask you guys. So you said you're emotional. I'm assuming this isn't the place, but I wanted to ask: did you feel anything when Freyr sacrificed himself?
No,
There was
you don't know him well enough.
Can I say something else also to that effect? There was a character on a boat that jumped off onto a wyvern.
The traveler.
And it was like a big like he's
sad.
he is actually a cool character. Like there's a side quest that like is about him, and you get to like it's actually really cool. But up until that point, you're on that like floating boat, and you're being attacked by wyverns and dragons or whatever. And this guy just stands up, starts praying to himself, and the camera focuses on him, and then he jumps off and sacrifices himself, and somebody's like, fucking, I don't know, Bartholomew, no! And I remember feeling like, who the fuck was that? like who was that? Like I know that they got into it later, and it's a great side quest actually. It's really good. But in that moment, I felt so I've been paying really close attention to this game. I'm actually really into this, and I love all these characters. I've never seen this man before.
There's a couple beats there that are really interesting. Like you get the boat, like they hand you the boat right there, and I remember thinking, oh, we're gonna roll into Ragnarok with a magic flying boat or something along those lines. I don't think it shows up again. Does it? Maybe in the post game at some point, magic flying boat.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. I guess not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Freyr. It's Freyr's boat. So
that's in one of the Excel cells.
He hands it to you.
Yeah, he gives it to you.
In your game, you're already in God of War Ragnarok. You're already like, all right, that's going to be your commander. That's a giant snake. I've collected an interdimensional wolf. Now I've got a flying boat. You've got the whole adventure game. We're building a team. We're going to roll into Ragnarok. We're going to do these things. And that one surprised me that happened. When he died on that boat, it actually reminded me of the Disney Plus series Obi-Wan that has like a really emotional beat for just some dude that dies in it, and you're like, okay,
yeah, who's right. That? Yeah,
okay,
yeah. I don't know. There's a couple. Like I said, there's like definitely a couple of moments where I'm like, I don't know who that is. I'm sorry. But
that's why I felt the same way when I was asking about Tyr. Like, I got to say, because I must have missed something. My interpretation of it, or what I thought, I was like, what happened? Like, and my interpretation was that they freed him. And then when Atreus goes to Midgard, he somehow gets tracked back with one of the ravens or whatever, and they somehow do a body swap or somehow. And that's when I thought it changed. Like, that's when I thought here. No. Yeah. So I just totally missed that whole thing.
You can see ravens in Tyr's temple. Like when you go rescue Tyr, you can see the ravens. And I think it's like you don't understand really what that even means unless you finish it. And I think that's like really cool. I love anything that once you're finished, it recontextualizes certain events. I think this game does a great job. Even just like little thing. And granted, I didn't pick up on this. I saw this pointed out, but I thought it was like really clever. It reminded me of something that Kojima might have done. Kind of similar to that loading screen in the beginning where like Thor kills you and then he brings you back to life. He pulls you out of the loading screen. Where when you find Tyr, and even when you're talking about Tyr, like when Kratos is speaking about Tyr, or when Mimir and all these characters, there's an accent over the Y all the time. And then every time fake Tyr speaks, the subtitle has no accent over it.
Interesting.
I think that's like, that's such a, I love that. That's like not like super amazing or anything, but it's like, it adds this like texture to it where it's
very
like, that's so, yeah, it's very cool. And then when you find Tyr later, the real Tyr, there is an accent over the Y, and it's
that's interesting. Yeah, Dustin.
When the twist was revealed, it was a good twist because my gut reaction was they didn't earn that. Like I had no idea, and I had this. I was talking to Holly. I was like, I don't know if they actually built that up. Does that actually make sense? And then, sure enough, like watching YouTube videos and going back to the beginning, it's like, oh, they actually really did build this up, and I'm just a moron. A good twist should make you feel like a moron.
Yeah. He even like when he greets Freya, he says "Frigg," which is like just like really like small. And even when he's like, oh, when you're going through Yggdrasil and they're talking, and Atreus is like, hey, that's where we found your hidden temple for the giants or whatever, and he goes, oh yeah, how did that work? And it's like, how did that turn out? Like he's like, you could hear the slow realization. It's like, oh yeah, like right. It's really interesting, like going through those dialogues, like the videos of that dialogue again, because there's it's so obvious actually in like a lot of ways. And I thought once Tyr just randomly decided like, hey, I'm actually going to step up now. Like once that happened, it was like, hey, something's up. And then obviously that was when everything was falling apart. And that was when you were supposed to kind of feel like something was wrong. So I think they did a great job with that.
There's the scene when he's realizing the prophecy that he was told wasn't true.
Yeah.
That whatever it is, that it's not every realm that gets destroyed, but just the one Asgard.
Asgard.
And you can see him like the gears turning. You're like, why is this a big deal to you?
A little thing I really like also is because Odin is blind in his right eye. Even as Tyr, he's bumping into things.
Oh, that's so interesting.
From his right side. Like there's a lot of little like you could tell they really cared a lot about detail in this game. In
good thing IGN fucked it up fucking rude.
I was gonna say they just put it in the title of the IGN review.
It's so fucked. Like that is a really shitty fucking thing to do.
You have 30 seconds to complete this game, says IGN.
I try. Well, that really is because I having been in that world, you do get a warped sense of what everyone is doing, right, or how far everyone is. And I've said before, I used to fight with the editor in chief there because my video reviews never used footage more than 3 hours into any game. And when I reviewed Mass Effect 3, he was like, you got to go deeper into the game. And Sean, I'm like, I'm absolutely not doing that. Like, it's just too risky to even acknowledge anything that happens after the first few hours. So I've not always been good about it or not always been accurate about avoiding spoilers. And I hate being the one who spoils something for people, but I've always tried to be cognizant of that. And especially when you're writing headlines for a major website, not a good thing. But I wanted to make sure we didn't get off of the gameplay before we've said everything we wanted to say about it. And I want to go back to you, Hoeg, with this because you had said you liked the spear.
I really love Draupnir.
I thought it was cool the way it added this game felt very Metroidvania to me in a way that the first one didn't. Yeah, exactly. Like where you're really gaining access to new areas, very 3D Metroidvania, kind of like Darksiders or one of those other games that people might allude to.
Well, you're seeing those spouts of steam like for 25 hours. You're like, clearly I'm going to get something for these. And then it turns out to be an exploding spear, which
I thought it was going to be, I don't know why in my mind I envisioned it as a boots there was like wind. I interpreted it as like some sort of wind is coming out and you're going to like jump on it.
I didn't know what we were going to get. I had no clue.
I didn't know what was going to happen. But talk to me about the combat and why you were taken with the spear. Because I have to say, I really played with the axe almost exclusively, unless you have to, sometimes you have to use the blades, the barriers and all that. But I think I use the axe 95% plus of the time, and then just constantly spamming the triangle button.
Yeah. So, since I'm the negative one a lot on this, I want to say one very positive thing. That is, I think the battle system is vastly improved over 2018. I think they added a whole host of things. And I think most importantly, the enemy variety and the things that they're asking you to do with those things is greatly enhanced. So actually playing the game, being in those fights, you, Colin, talking about the cinematic portions of just kind of going about your business and seeing really cool stuff. I think that is throughout the game. Actually playing God of War is amazing. I have my issues with the narrative, but actually playing it is great. Draupnir was a really good addition because it's late. You don't get it for a long time. And then what it does, I really liked, which is it gives you some length, it gives you some speed, and then the holds, the hold attacks for both weak and strong can actually put the spear in them, and then you can explode them later on. There's a whole host of enhancements that you can do with the thing. And if you really start using it a lot, it's got a heavy kind of hold throw that will just keep hitting them, much like your axe, but really keep them taken up. I think even better than some of those axe attacks. And so even those hard encounters, if you can line things up right and you can just keep them, I don't even know if it's in midair, but they're at least held by the spear, and you can just keep doing it and then explode them and then do it some more. It's just very powerful feeling, and in a very different way than I view the axe, and some to a lesser extent the Blades of Chaos, as very heavy feeling. It's very Kratos, we're going to bust some skulls, and the spear just feels a little bit different from him. And I just really loved it. I wasn't expecting a weapon like that in this game. And I think outside of barriers, as you say, which unfortunately, especially towards the end where they're like rotating barriers and you have to try to keep track of which weapons you're using, outside of those instances, I'm using the spear almost exclusively.
Interesting.
Because that was just a lot of fun. I used the spear to kill Odin. I used the spear for all the big stuff in Ragnarok. And it was a lot of fun. I love the battle system. As soon as they introduced like I don't even know, little salamanders in Svartalfheim. I'm gonna always mispronounce
Svartalfheim.
There's an F in there that I always forget.
Yeah, you can't put. There's a lot of consonants that don't belong together.
I think I was
it's very Norse.
Yes, definitely.
I think I keep wanting to call it Svartalheim, and it's actually Svartalfheim.
I think I was calling it Svartalheim as well.
Yeah, it's that F.
Yeah.
What is that F doing? We don't know.
No, I don't know.
But ever since they introduced kind of that area, and I do realize that's the first area, and I'm not loving the narrative pacing, but it's shown to me that it's not just all going to be winter. Like my deep fear was like, you're not just going to snow everywhere, are you? And so that was cool to see. That's like, no, it's whatever Mimir says. Nimble winter affects each realm differently. Okay, cool beans, bro. And so I really enjoyed the battle system. I really loved the boss fight against the interdimensional root guardian. I can't remember what the name of it is, but when you're fighting the guy.
Oh yeah,
thank
Nidhogg.
you.
Right.
Yeah, through the portal, and it's like swapping places and hitting you with portals. I thought that was glorious. That was maybe my favorite fight in the game.
Yeah.
Right. Well, just to add to that too, overall, the boss variety is maybe one of the biggest improvements between these two games, where it felt like
trolls.
Yeah. You've only fight a few trolls in this game, which is fantastic. But I was just looking to remember, because I knew instantly when playing Ragnarok that it seemed like the bosses already had a ton more variety. But looking back at some of these, fighting Heimdall is great because he's so fucking annoying that it feels great to punch him in the face.
Oh, totally, dude. I loved killing him. I got to be honest with you. Yeah.
I think that's Jason Street, right? It's just to use pop culture references. That's the dude from Friday Night Lights. You could hear it in his voice.
Interesting. Yeah.
One of the most creative boss fights is I don't know how to say her name. It's Angerboda's grandma. Not
that's a
bloat. Witch. Giant witch
fight.
She was
that
cool.
was cool. I referenced that fight on Sacred Symbols without naming it, as saying like, this is such a weird and unique boss fight for this game. But overall, that was a criticism that they clearly took to heart. That's like, we don't want to fight the same troll over and over again with a few interesting bosses. And they went totally ham with a bunch of awesome bosses.
Well, it felt like old God of War. I mean, I will say that I don't have a great affinity for the old God of War games like a lot of people do, but their hallmark are huge bosses, especially by the time you get to God of War 3. Screen size bosses. And my favorite boss fight in the game was actually when you fight Garm, when you finally catch up with him and fight him. It felt so big. And it was ridiculous. It's like, holy mother of God. And you're like hitting his paws and trying to get him to like pick his paws up and trying to just get him to trip up. Yeah, I think you're using the spear to maybe fuck him up as well. And I really,
spear's pretty useful.
Yeah, it is. I do like the explosion. I also like how the spear is used to get some of those puzzles where you have to use it to explode at the same time. All of the different icons to open those treasure chests.
We can talk about puzzles because I've got to complain about one of their mechanics.
We'll get to that in a moment. Chris, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, because it's so interesting that you guys defaulted to it, because I was constantly using all of them.
Me too.
Like I would like axe people up in the air, and then I would Blades of Chaos them down, and then I would like rain spears. It is a really satisfying game to play when you chain shit together, and I think it's built for that in some way. It's weird because like the controls don't really allow you to do that in a way that I think is like super fluid, but it feels so good to get like combos like that. Like I thought the spear was awesome. Like. Specifically, there's one, I think, runic heavy attack where you throw one in the air and then it just rains like hundreds of spears. And I thought
that was my main.
Like the visual of that is so dope. And obviously, there's so many different runic attacks for the Blades of Chaos, which are super satisfying to just and even just like the triangle kind of like swing with the Blades of Chaos.
I like that.
But it is fun to fight.
It is,
and I do think. I loved the Garm boss fight, not only because of, like you said, the scale of it, but also, again, this is a great way that they play with mythology, because there is discourse around whether or not Fenrir and Garm are the same entity. And the fact that they play with that and actually use it as a mechanic, that's just so cool. But I think my favorite boss fight was honestly the two. It's not particularly huge, and it's not particularly this big. It's not a big boss fight, but when you're creating Surtur and you fight those two Valkyrie queens at the edge of like the universe, and then you get that great ending where it's like a tag team kind of. I don't love QuickTime events, but sometimes when they're like done really, really well and they're like framed really well and something cool is happening, I'll give it a pass. And that was one where you and Atreus are just kind of doing this great tag team combo, and then it ends in this total video game ass screenshot
bear, right?
of Kratos standing with a bear behind him. And I the second I saw that screen, I was like, I love it. I love video games for this exact reason. This is ridiculous and it's awesome. And this is all happening in a narratively satisfying context. Like for me, it was just like, that's hilarious. It was like Kratos it almost looked like a Tekken pre-battle screen where it's like Kratos versus Kuma or whatever. And I was just like, this is wonderful. But also that set piece, that area in general is just like very just enthralling to look at.
I was taken with it too. It's called Spark of the World. I had it here written in my notes. It's really, really cool. Yeah, I like that fight too with the Valkyries. It's funny you said that because I thought the visuals in that fight were awesome because they kept coming back to life or whatever. And so they would ask for Odin's light and there would be these huge beams of light and they'd get caught up in them almost like a tractor beam. And I just was really taken aback by it. And I think one of the reasons I'm a little disconnected from the mythos and the feel of the game is because, again, I'm not into mythology, so I don't have the insight in any of that, which I think is probably incredibly additive to the experience, but also
incredibly.
I would imagine that. But my bigger problem, I think, is that I'm just not a big high fantasy guy. And I feel like a lot of the game reads like high fantasy, so that when you get to a place like Spark of the World, it feels truly different as opposed to the incredibly saturated sepia tone, weird shit they do in all the, various locales, to get a really specific, colorful or godly or wondrous aesthetic. It was cool to just see something a little more almost sci-fi. And
it felt like space. It felt like deep space.
I dug it.
Awesome. What's funny about that, Colin, is their choice with Asgard is almost deliberately not the MCU, right? Like they're almost specifically that, and they call that out. It's like, what were you expecting when you show up at like the lodge? And I thought that was really interesting. Definitely. I think one of the beats that they do throughout the game, which I think is interesting, is they know the MCU exists. And so almost all of the introductory conversations is like reestablishing the relationships and what you might think about all these various kind of aspects of Norse mythology and saying, no, it's this for this purpose. And if you really watch that, they do that a lot. And I think they did it pretty elegantly. Oftentimes you have exposition that's like, what? Okay. But you could, only because I was paying attention to like, well, there people have interactions with these things, especially the introduction for like Thor. They spend a good chunk of time being like, here's where Thor is at in his life. Here's his background. Here's his relationship with dad and all these things that are very specifically like, okay, ditch what you might be bringing from Chris Hemsworth and establish where we are at this. I thought they did a really good job at that.
No, they did.
I come in doubly ignorant because I don't know that shit either. So I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on.
I think there's definitely some cleansing actions they do in the game to be like, we have to reestablish what you might think you already know.
I think that's why they show up so quickly. Also, it's just kind of like, we got to get this ball rolling in a way that's, we just, people want to see Thor. Let's just show them. And but I think they handle all that stuff. Also, before I forget to mention, shout out to that bar fight in Asgard. I thought that bar fight was fun.
What randomness that is.
It was so cool. It was like the few points when I was playing as a Tracer, I was like, this is pretty dope. This is a dope sequence. And also just like, there's just so much fantastical visual image, like the frozen lightning that's created when Mjolnir and the axe collide. That's such a cool idea. Like the idea that these two magical weapons would do something this completely out of pocket. I think it's really fucking cool.
Dude, I'm so glad you brought up the bar fight because you know what that felt like to me? Uncharted.
No, totally.
Which I thought was really interesting. It was like pulling a little bit of Naughty Dog into the game, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, I loved that scene as well. Do you want to shout out any of the combat, Dustin? I don't think we've heard from you yet about. I'm curious what weapons you used.
Well, I think that I'm like Chris in that I used all three, but the one element that he didn't mention, which I'm sure you did, Chris, is that I liked how the special abilities were on cooldown. So you could basically get a nice flow where you use your specials for one weapon and kind of use up all of your specials and then move on to the next weapon, use your specials there, fight for a little bit, balance. Move to the next one. Yeah. It almost, this isn't a very great comparison, but in Doom Eternal, you're constantly having to cycle through weapons if you want to be optimal in your combat. Yeah. And it reminded me a little of that. That's like, okay, you should be switching through all three weapons in order to get the optimal amount of special abilities out. So I was using all three the whole time. And Yeah, I like the spear a lot. It was a nice way to change it up in that the axe felt like the all-around weapon. The Blades of Chaos was good for wide spreads of enemies. And then the spear was like this really nice, fast weapon that you could kind of get a nice range to. So it was nice how they all had their distinct situations, but you're best off switching between all of them.
Yeah, it's
also
funny
just just we can move on from the minute, but I again, Dropnir as a weapon rooted in the mythology is so cool because in the mythology it's just a ring. It's just a ring that it just duplicates itself constantly, and so the idea of like combining that with a spear, like the idea of having a spear that replicates itself, is so video gamey. It's a very video gamey thing, but it's also like rooted in the reality of this world in a way that is faithful to the. It's so. I don't know. You're right when you say that like having some understanding of Norse mythology is really additive because they did a lot of homework and they also got really playful with it. And I think it's one of the best aspects. If you're like into any of this shit, I could easily understand why people are like, yeah, this is a 10 out of 10. I don't think that most people who gave it a 10 out of 10 are that into Norse mythology. But for those people, easy. Like, this is so interesting the way they play with it.
I agree with you completely, Chris. But what's funny about that is, again, like my mental state on this, which is like towards the end of the game, I'm like, oh, yes, you think you're very clever. Like that's my reaction to all these as they come through. But I really did think Dropnir, to me, it's like it's almost just random. If you don't know the Norse stuff, you don't know what Dropnir is. What is it? Is it Sindri or is it Brock? Just goes in a well, grabs a ring, comes back. You take it to a mermaid. You got a spear. I mean, I guess people are just rolling with it. But it is interesting if you don't have any of that. I recognize, as you said, Chris, I have the exact same reaction at the top of the game. It's like, oh, Fenrir looks a lot smaller than I expected. And
right?
How are you a wolf right now? I mean, like, what is going on?
That was my thing. That was my thing too, where I was like, I mean, they do this a lot. They set up something, and initially it's kind of annoying, and then it has in my opinion, a really good payoff. Like Fenrir dying in the beginning was like, okay, you're trying a little too hard to make me sad. It's like, okay, you're killing the dog immediately. Yeah, okay, I see through this.
I had a hard time with that. I'm glad that they rectified it.
But also
one of the places you were emotional was the death of Fenrir.
Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah, but that was one of those things where I was like, that was one of the points where I was like, oh, this is just completely throwing Norse mythology out the window because like Fenrir is really important.
Yeah.
And then
as soon as the name came out, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So absolutely.
And then they do it again with the snake in the Jotunheim, where like that was for me boring to play through. I was like, I don't. Aside from that big grandma boss fight, I was like, it's fine. But then
that's what I'm saying about them being clever.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Like they advance that cleverness, and I think sometimes at the expense of telling a tight story, or they want to hit the Loki beats, Jorgenmunder, Fenrir.
Oh, definitely.
Else.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I'm just looking at my notes, kind of trying to see if we have like what else I want to talk about. You guys have a little more time, right? I don't want to take up too much of my time.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's keep going then. So I will say, as far as the combat is concerned, that I've long commented that I think in my 30s I've just gotten worse and worse at games. And so I'm not really sophisticated enough to be balancing all these weapons and doing all these things. But I wanted to ask you guys this because I asked people on Discord and they were making fun of me and giving me the old man emoji. But this game was really hurting my hands to play. And I don't have that problem with games. I don't know what it was. It was, I know what it is. It's a lot of tapping on the triggers, which you're usually doing feathering the triggers or holding the triggers down. Usually doing a lot of pressing on the face buttons. This game obviously wouldn't work that way, but I found it really fatiguing. It's very rare for me to have a fight in a game where I am losing and die because I just cannot. I don't have the stamina to do what I'm necessary to do, as opposed to Elden Ring, where I just don't have the patience. There's nothing to do with the button combinations or whatever. It's just I'll block for 15 or 20 seconds and play it properly. Then I'm like, fuck it, and then I'll just run in and die. This was different. I just had to say that. I don't know if it's just me, but it hurt my hands to play this game at times.
What difficulty were you playing on, Colin?
Just the normal one. Normal difficulty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Balance, I think it's called.
Balance, yeah, I think that was the one.
Yeah, that's what I did as well.
Same.
I'm not trying to get an Elden Ring experience out of God of War. I just
certainly not.
I don't feel like I had that experience, but I think I probably used light attack more than it sounds like you did. The bumpers are just more forgiving, Colin, for the older men here. So and if it makes you feel better, Colin, I'm definitely older than you. So
yeah, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm atrophying in some mysterious ways, I suppose. But I wanted to also add. I'm sorry, did someone else?
No, I was gonna say, like, I platinumed Crash Team Racing in 2.5 days, so no, God of War did not hurt my hands.
Yeah, fair enough. That was incredible.
That game fucks you up. That is a ridiculous game. So no,
it was incredible that you did that. Just for some random bet that you made on the show.
Because I didn't want to buy some random kid in Ethiopia a PS5. It
was very honorable for you to do that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys about, there are a few things I want to ask you about, but we've been very positive about the game. I was curious if what sticks out to you is the game's worst elements. And for me, I really feel like I remember saying that 2018 God of War suffered most, in my opinion, from not doing the little things right. And what I meant by that was, why is the map system so bad? Why is the quick travel system so bad? Why is there so much exposition? Why are you wasting so much time? And I feel like they didn't rectify much of that. And when I said aloud, when I first went into that quick travel tree thing, I literally said, you have got to be fucking kidding me.
I can see this happening.
Right. But, it's like forcing me to ride the subway in Spider-Man. And I understand that there is a narrative reason why they make you do this, because they spend so much time on exposition in those that they can't let you skip it. But that's a design flaw. You need to figure out a way to get that in somewhere else in the game.
Well, that's Angraboda writ large, right? I mean, I feel like that section is however many hours because they want her to tell you that much stuff, and then you're picking fruit. Like that narrative, that story, that what they wanted to say took precedence over your actual playing experience in a number of places.
I feel that way too, as far as there are times where it's like, this could just be a cutscene. I don't have to play. You don't have to have me do a quick time event. I know you want to make me feel like I'm active, but if you have this info dump or this reason to tell me things, then just do it, and do it in that very stylish PlayStation way. I don't need to necessarily interact with it. And I just think, so there was that, but I just think the UI generally is poor. And awesome. I just can't believe how bad it is compared to the quality of the rest of the game. And I'll even go further and say that I think the systems are too deep. There becomes a point. I was finding things in the game where I'm like, I'm not even sure what the fuck you're talking about. Like, why do I need all of these new items? I'm not equipping any of them. The things I have are the strongest that I need. There's this very structured upgrade tree where you have to find all these items as you get further in the game, and it's stilted, but it makes it feel like it's open. I just feel like they could have you're upgrading, using experience points to upgrade your weapons, upgrade moves, upgrade this, upgrade that. I'm like, guys, chill out. There doesn't need to be this much of a role-playing element to the game. I feel like you get lost in it a little bit. And I think they could have literally cut 75% of that shit out. And I think the game would have been perfectly fine. You just upgrade your weapons. You have a weapon and armor and a helmet or whatever the hell you would equip. And that's it. You don't need to get crazy with it. So I felt like they were getting, it felt like a very heavy system for God of War, and it's out of place. I always respected Naughty Dog in the sense that they always resisted making Uncharted into something that it very easily could have morphed into during the era it came out, when everyone was upgrading this and doing this and that. And they were just like, no, you just find weapons and ammo, and it's a totally linear game. And they resisted that urge around them to do more. And I feel like this game does the exact opposite. The map is useless in the game. Fucking useless.
Never used it.
Yeah.
Just absolutely unreadable. You can't zoom in very far on it, and all of the rest. So it's all of these, again, little things. I'm not as frustrated with them this time as I was last time, because I guess it's what God of War is, I guess, now. I just feel like those are the things that need to be called out, that there's just little, and obviously the shimmying and the going under. I don't give a fuck what any developer says. That stuff's in the game to allow for loading almost always. It's not to funnel you into things, and it's not a design philosophy. It's nonsense. A lot of these things exist to let things load and buffer. And that's what makes it a PS4 game to me. It just defers in all ways to being a PlayStation 4 game. And I'm disappointed. Dude, those long ass boat rides, the ride on when you want to go from one place to the next, you have to unlock the fast travel system. So you have to use that train and you can't skip it. There's just little things like that I think are weird. they focus so broadly on the great things that make the game great, no doubt. But why isn't anyone paying attention to the little things? I know Hoeg, you're a football fan. It's like a great football coach that can't manage the clock or something. Like just fundamentally doesn't understand something really important about the game.
Okay, all right, you can call up my Lions. You don't need to subtweet me here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, he's a good coach, but doesn't understand anything.
Right, like if you don't understand, like you have to have someone, and if you don't have an eye for that, you have to have someone in your ear that's watching out for that stuff in production to say like, I don't know, you guys have played this for 4 years, so you don't understand this UI sucks. Right? Like you have to have new
the
people.
UI, I think, was a step back. But can I offer a devil's advocate counterpoint to like things like the shimmying and everything else? I think just like the storytelling, and again, reason lines are going to be able to differ on this about what values you ascribe to this. I think they value this realism, immersion kind of concept more than they value the play experience. And so it comes out with, hey, if you have to get there, you're going to ride a mine cart. If you have to get there, you're going to be in a boat on a river. If this mountain would reasonably have a crevice, we're going to put a crevice in here, regardless of everything else. And I think that that's where they come at things. That's the same with the story. If we need to tell this exposition, you're riding a yak, and we're going to have you pick fruit. We got to get this done. And so we're going to do those things. And to some extent, I respect that. I think they're pretty consistent on that. It didn't work for me entirely. But I do think they're consistent on that. There's no explanations for the UI. I actually think the UI is a significant step back from 2018, which I thought was awful in 2018. So I can't make any excuses for the UI. And on the score of being too complicated, I think it was like the third or fourth treasure chest that had the sixth and seventh different kind of material in it. And I'm like, I don't have any idea what is happening with, Dwarven alloy as guardian steel, this kind of wood, and it's just put it all in. And when I get to the store, I'll just see what I can buy.
Right, exactly.
It's not a terribly engaging system.
I agree. It's too much. I think that's I think this value proposition that people think in their minds, well, I got to have a lot of options. It's like, why?
Well, it made every chest less than for me. You go to the chest, you get two pieces of material. Like, I guess I'm assuming that's taking me up some chain somewhere, and you just move on, and it's not as cool.
Yeah. It's strange. Chris, what do you think the game doesn't do well? If anything, I don't know.
I mean, I agree largely with the UI. I actually think the UI is it's still terrible, but I think it's more like. I think maybe I think I like it 5% more. In God of War 2018, I didn't engage with any of the RPG shit because I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't stomach pressing the pause button. I was just like, I cannot fucking do this. But for whatever reason, this time I kind of got over that. I don't know if maybe it was presented in a slightly better way, or I understood where things would be reasonably. Even if it was a little too zoomed in. Jesus, it's so big. There's no breathing room on the screen. This is generally a problem I have with video game UI at large. It's kind of like I feel like the people who design movie posters and the people who design UIs just agree on two things: like make it terrible and make it cluttered. And that's I feel like just orange. Yeah, it's like, look at all the Spider-Man poster of five of the same Spider-Man is hilarious. But I think of I don't know. I think the UI is worse. I like the RPG system a little bit more, and I think that's probably due to the fact that I just think the finishers are a lot more interesting to kind of mix and match. I was swapping runic heavy attacks, and I don't know if you did this too, Justin. I assume you probably did a little bit. But there's just so much expression that is open to you in that when you really engage with that system. So I didn't mind it, although the multiple shields I found a bit just let me parry. I don't need a hilarious amount of shields. But
right.
I think the worst thing the game does, aside from that yak section, which I think we all kind of agree is just horrific. I think it's
simultaneously loving Angerboda. It's a really conflicted emotion I have for Ironwood.
Well, it's infuriating because it's a really good character, and you're spending time with this really good character in a place that you just want to kill yourself. And and it is undoubtedly the absolute worst part of the game for me. In my opinion, everything before and after that is way like eons better. But I think the puzzles are just not. I don't think God of War needs this. And I think if there are going to be puzzles in a God of War game, they should be combat puzzles in the same way that Doom Eternal does it. Doom Eternal is a great puzzle game because the combat is the puzzle. And that's a design philosophy that I feel like should be adopted in a game like God of War. It's so story heavy. It's so action oriented. Why not incorporate the puzzle mechanics into the combat? Why not make puzzle solving part of the most fun part of your game instead of these kind of, all right, what does this pulley do? Where's this infuriatingly hidden pot that is just somewhere that I would never fucking think to look in a million years? Like, and also there's kind of the in-universe problem of, I am Kratos. Not even that I just wouldn't be doing this at all, but if I see a pot that's out of reach, how is it out of reach? I jumped off of Gaia in God of War 3. You know, like I leap 10,000 feet in the air sometimes. I can't reach that pot. Like that it's too Uncharted, and it doesn't really belong in this world. It always kind of rips you. And there's interesting exposition, I think. Like, I think exposition to me is like, it's a double-edged sword. I think it can generally be bad, but I think in this game it's generally good. But that's only because, again, I'm just interested in this kind of mythology. But it's literally just space for exposition. It's like you're going to be meandering around looking for a pot that you can smack, or God, those timed ones where you got to rush.
Yeah,
I thought for sure they would get rid of those, because I remember those being like a really terrible part of the first one, and then I remember seeing the first one 8 hours in and being like, "Are you serious? You're doing this to me again?" I don't know. The puzzles are the worst.
Can I be?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Can I be additive to that a little bit? Because I tend to agree with the puzzles being the worst, and I think there's like three reasons that I have a real problem with the puzzles. One, for every good pulley or freeze the gear or whatever else you're doing puzzle, there's like two more of them in a row for whatever you're doing, rather than just kind of one and work with it. It's like a sequence in almost all those instances. Two, I freaking want to kill my son when he starts trying to say, "Look over here. Have you checked this out?" Like every single room you enter into.
Oh my God.
Like, it makes me crazy. And I forgot it. I beat this game over like 10 sessions, and I would forget that particular thing. And you would walk into the room. It was like, "Hey, Dad, I think there's something interesting over here. There's a gear over here. Have you seen this thing?" And it's like,
the game gives you 3 seconds max before Atreus turns to you and goes, "Are you fucking stupid? Freeze the pulley with your axe mechanic." And it's just like, what do you do? Like, why? This is so immersion breaking. Also,
let me play the game.
Yeah, it reminds me of like those old games that like tried to be very cinematic, but they would still like it would be very, very like serious, and the tone would be like very, very cinematic, and then you'd be like, press the triangle button. It's like, chill. Like, no, this doesn't belong.
So I hate that, and that actually goes along with like Horizon Forbidden West, where I think they just don't trust you in these environments.
That is Horizon Forbidden West's biggest problem. I think it's that
they just don't trust you.
Yeah, they don't trust you to figure out a basic puzzle. And this game, because it's not that big of a part of the game necessarily, it doesn't happen all the time. But when it does happen, they just don't give you the space. If I'm stuck on a puzzle for 15 minutes or like 7 minutes, throw in a hint.
Well, give me the Uncharted button.
I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Yeah, Uncharted, you're right, does a really great job where it says like, I think you press triangle or something.
Yeah. It's like, you've been looking at this bell a long time. Are you okay? I mean, it's great art, but do you want a little help?
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, yeah, don't do it in advance for me. The last thing I will say on this is that I just really dislike the arcane arrows and like the clunkiness with its interaction with the environment. I never fully felt like the actual visual cues that I'm getting from those, how long they're going to last, what I have to do to string along an elemental burst or those kinds of things, that never felt precise enough to me to feel good.
Dude, I beat the game without knowing that you could double the radius.
Oh, okay.
Of the flame arrow things, like whenever you would like have to chain together like
this
like the purple things. Yeah, I had no idea you could spam square and make those circles like way bigger. So
yeah,
like,
but then they die earlier, so you get this kind of like, so if you make it 2 bonuses, then that one's going to die. It's on a timer, and then it's spinning around. I just don't think that they mastered they're trying to cue you in as to like, okay, these are overlapping now. You're done. This one's going to die now. But I just don't feel like they mastered that, and it just winds up feeling really kind of almost test case beta type puzzle solving to me.
No, it's totally like I didn't like it either. I thought. Every time the arrows, God, it's always comes down to Atreus with me. It's so funny.
Also, Freya, she's also doing the arrow puzzles.
Yeah, that's true. But Freya has those wings, and she like comes in and like fucking does some crazy shit.
The Valkyries are
You
cool,
cannot believe
man.
how many times I'm playing with Freya, and I'm like, turn into a bird. I need that over there. What are you doing?
Yeah, you're right in the sense that the whole barrier thing. I mean, that was something we discussed on Sacred a couple of weeks ago, and people were busting balls about it. But I'm like, dude, there literally is. I don't know if it's in like the Dwarven village. You come to a perpendicular bridge, and there's just a cart, and Kratos could literally just step over this little ledge. Like I could do it.
Yeah,
and there are. I know you're supposed to suspend disbelief and all of that, but. You got to do a better job of identifying and delineating space, I think, in your game. There are just some weird design flaws in the game generally, but Dustin, we haven't heard from you in a while. What do you think the game doesn't do well? I mean, we're obviously all pretty effusive with praise in various levels, but I'm wondering if anything strikes you as being subpar.
Well, I think you guys covered the major ones, so I don't want to retread those because I think I agree with everything that was said. But I have 3 nitpicks that I think you guys will agree with. Number 1, the compass, which this ties to the map, sucks. I had the compass going like all over the place. I'm like, where am I supposed to fucking go? It would be confused sometimes, depending on the.
Am I right? Is it a GPS compass? Is that what's happening? Like
so
it's taking you down
what's happening is it is pointing you to the nearest invisible checkpoint on the way to where you're supposed to go. So sometimes it'll be like, you know, you're heading in the direction of the compass, but your objective will say you're getting further away. And it's like, that is a good observation. I totally forgot about that because I think I blocked it out as a trauma response.
So the compass sucks. 2, some lines of dialogue repeated too often, specifically when he's like, "You're on fire, brother."
Yeah. Oh my God.
It'll pass.
Yeah.
You're on fire is the worst call out. You just did you notice you're on fire? Yeah, Mimir.
Yeah. So that happens way too often. And then I have the only time that I felt annoyed by the writing, and I think it was intentional this way, but I don't know, it still didn't work for me, is that there's the part where Kratos and Freya are on this mission, and Freya hasn't decided if she's going to team up with them. And it's this back and forth bitch Olympics on who had a worse life for like 45 minutes. Well, it's like, well, I had to kill my wife and kids. And Freya's like, oh, well, I was abused by it. It's this back and forth for so long. I'm like, we get it.
That was also the worst.
This is the moment. This is the obvious writing. Like, we get you both have suffered in different ways, and together you can take that pain and work together. It's like, okay.
Also, you know what's weird about that part? This is the first time you're with Freya, right? Where she's like in bird form and she can't manifest because she's tied still to the roots. I don't know if you guys picked up on this, and maybe it was just me, 'cause I was really clued into this. But Freya's performance before and after that sequence is great. And for whatever reason, in that section, it feels like she's narrating. Like it's almost, it doesn't feel like a character speaking. And if you go back and look at audio or like clips of this section, you'll know exactly what I mean. It sounds like she's narrating for like an audiobook instead of talking to you. It's very weird. Like, it almost feels like this was the first thing they recorded and they never went back because they thought it was fine. Like, that's kind of how it reads to me. It felt really weird because up until that point, she's great. And then just like, I thought something was off about this place. And it's like, what? Like, what's going on? You can read
an audiobook. I'm listening.
No, it's just very, I don't know. It's just very weird. But that was, I will say the writing for me, there are parts, not the whole time, and it's not even for particularly long, that feels a little Marvel, a little bit, specifically with fucking Rocket Raccoon, who just straight up shows up. I have never been pulled out of an experience like I was when that fucking squirrel showed up. And I know
wild.
I know I know that that's a real character. I get it. Like I am familiar with this character. Although I think in Norse mythology he's just a squirrel. Like there's nothing particularly like fantastical about him. So they had to do it up, but he just looks like Rocket Raccoon. He looks like a nerd Rocket Raccoon.
See, if we're going to talk about Marvel, I think there are some interactions that happen with like Tyr at the house and some other gods where it does feel just one notch too casual, just a little notch of like two Californian dude bros chatting it out with each other. And there are a couple of moments where I remember having those interactions and be like, okay, all right, I get it. But you've gone a little bit too casual. The other aspect of writing that annoys me is, and a couple of games do this now, you're supposed to go and look for treasure chests. You go off the beaten path, but you always have a buddy with you, and they have so many call outs to like, I don't know, Kratos, get back. We got to go do the thing. What are you doing? Oh, he's always looking for loot. He's lost on these things. They have so many of those call outs, and many of them are cute. But there is this kind of lingering, guys, you built this game. Let me go look through your environments. Please stop.
Yeah.
Please stop.
And it's also just focus tested to death. And that's a thing that's why there's so many puzzle clues. And I think that's
a PlayStation problem.
Definitely.
In general.
Definitely. Well, that's why I'm always surprised, because it's not even Uncharted used to give you kind of vague hints, right? Like the one thing Uncharted used to do, it would have that little like almost Law and Order type beat sound, and then it would move the camera and show you something or zoom in slightly on something. And that would be it would be a contextual hint. I'm stupid as fuck with game puzzles, and I wasn't having much trouble with the game puzzles in this game. And even I was disappointed that it was giving me so many contextual hints. And just talking about my experience, when I'm like, I really feel like I should probably be silent right now because I'm thinking about things. And to this point about the casualness, I don't know if you guys really care much about the codices in the game and reading a lot of the lore. It's in my opinion, I don't know who wrote this stuff, but it sounds ridiculous. A lot of it. It sounds like a 10-year-old girl wrote it. A lot of this. I don't know. It's hard for me to understand. I think it's coming from different perspectives. A lot of it Atreus' perspective, but I don't understand why it has to be written in such a casual and bizarre way. It doesn't seem weighty and real. And that I had a big problem with. So I actually just stopped reading it. I would collect things and get what I needed and observe my runes and all of this, but I'd stop reading them. I'm like, I don't like the way this is written. It just seems like they found someone on GameFAQs or someone, and they were like, you want to write the codex?
It doesn't have a lot of flavor, right? Yeah. Like, I don't think it's poorly written, but it doesn't have a lot of flavor. You think about this, I love codexes, right? I mean, at least as far back as like Mass Effect. Sure. I love learning all the things.
Oh, the
about
fake
all
planets? That's like one of my favorite things is just reading about the fake planets.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you think about, we got the Witcher update coming out next week. And it's like, I love reading like even the missions in there because they're all written from Dandelion. They all have these kind of weird, snarky versions of talking about what's happening. You don't get flavor of character in the codices in the God of War. I don't think you do. Yeah,
totally. It seems to me like it's written for you by someone else playing the game. That was kind of the way I was.
Notes, yeah.
Right. Like I was like, I don't understand what the vibe is here with that. I'm glad other people noticed that because I thought that was really, really strange.
Yeah. And then did you read the poems though? In relation to that, did you check those out?
I didn't read them, but I did see that they are all related to PlayStation games, which I didn't.
They're awesome.
Which I didn't identify. Yeah,
I didn't realize that for about 6 poems or something, and one was clearly Death Stranding, and I was like, wait.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't read them or look at them at all, and then I went to pick one up, and it had Astrobot's face on the book. It's like, what the fuck is that? And then so I went, and I finally looked at all the poems. I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome.
It is.
Well, I love the fake names. I love the coming up with a different name for the game. My favorite was MLB The Show, which is something like, giant group. It was Major League Baseball, The Show, and it was like, oh, that's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah. It was. I liked. I don't know. I don't really engage with codexes that much in games. I'm just like, I'll read a fucking book when I'm not playing my video game. But
that was like Control, and you and I were talking about Control, and it's like, dude, you have to dedicate basically a week of your life if you want to even understand anything that's going on in Control.
I am satisfied levitating and throwing things with my mind with no idea why.
I think I
This
understand.
can't possibly make sense without the text.
It does not make sense without the. I had no idea what was happening, and I still really
I
loved
still
it.
don't really know. I remember when we did the spoiler cast back in the day for it, and I spent all that time preparing for it. And I'm like, I actually think I understand the game less.
Yeah,
now
we
than-
don't, that is. If you listen to that spoiler cast, we undoubtedly have no idea what we're talking. We beat the game, but we are just fucking because it's a weird fucking game. But I don't know. I read some of these, and the one that I really loved is there's a codex entry where I think it's like a journal entry for Kratos where he's talking about. I don't know what the hell he's talking about, anger or something, and he's like, it reminds me of a boat captain I wronged many years ago.
Yep. He does.
I thought that was like really. I appreciate, and perhaps this is probably something that we all agree with. The most interesting thing about this game is that it exists, and like God of War 2018 as well, is that it exists alongside the previous ones,
right.
like narratively, like everything happened, and that is
It's
interesting.
weird with that, right? Like one of the things I actually felt a little bit. I'm not upset about, but I was like, hey, you watch it there. There's a sequence in Ragnarok where they're making fun of time travel and they go over the plot of God of War 2 and basically say it's ridiculous. And I said, all right, okay, chill. I love God of War 2.
Yeah, well, I felt like the referential nature of it was really ratcheted up a lot. And I felt like it was meant to show a softer or a softening and reflective Kratos, obviously. But it was cool because even I played God of War 1 and God of War 2. I didn't get very far in God of War 3, and I don't really remember them very well. But even when I wasn't recognizing what he was specifically referencing, I knew he was referencing something from the old games. And I felt like that is, I think, bar none, the coolest part of the God of War games is that they are the same. That's why I want, and we'll get into it, what we think might happen in the future. We'll end with that. But you're absolutely right to call that out, Chris. I think that's a really important part as well. And I just wanted to talk about, and not even talk about, just bring up a few other things. If you guys have any just quick talking points that you want to go over, we should do that before we go. But I just wanted to note, I liked the jellyfish side quest when you're liberating the jellyfish.
It's a good one.
And also, my favorite side quest was the whale one with Mimir. Did you guys do that one when he frees the whale?
And I didn't do that one.
Yeah, like
that's very early. That's Svartalheim, right?
Yeah, I missed it until the end. Like I didn't do it until probably 30 plus hours into the game. I don't know. I just missed that whole thing. I won't spoil it for you here, Chris, even though it's Spoilercast, because it's a very cool Mimir focused and very sad, I think, side quest about a whale.
Oh.
And so,
maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, check it out. And so I liked that one as well. I thought that was pretty cool. And one of the things that I think that this game does really well, which God of War has always done well and really excelled at, are just moments. In other words, you kind of go and plod through the game, and the game never lets you go very long without there being a scripted moment. And I dig that because it shows a little bit of hands-on where they expect you to go from beat to beat, and they let you kind of experience it in a freeform way, and then something happens. And one of the things that I thought were really cool was there's a part of the game when you're getting on and off your boat a bunch. And then when you go back to your boat once, you just get attacked by these like crocodiles. And I was like, that's fucking dope. In fact, I restarted the checkpoint, which is something I very rarely do because I wanted to see it again. Because I was like, that's cool because it scared me. Like it was a jump scare. Dug it. Yeah, Hoeg.
You know what I love about that moment, Colin, is that if I recall correctly, that was after a sequence where I got beat up a bit. And you see the boat and you're like, oh, it's safety. Nothing can happen to me. And I remember actually thinking about that before hitting that beach. And then it happens. And it's like a double boss fight that comes out of that interaction. And I was like, oh, you cheaters, you dirty dogs.
That's like they do that in The Last of Us Part 2 also. There's a moment where normally mechanically you are safe and they put it on its head. I like that. It's those, and Chris referenced earlier the Thor when he brings you back to life. Yeah. I like it when games can be a little clever about things like that. So I like that boat moment was really
false
good.
Credits are always awesome. We were just talking about Control. That's one of my favorite parts of Control.
I think, and that's what I wrote actually at the top of my notes as well, is I really dug both the cinematic intro credits and the cinematic ending credits, and realizing that the credits were actually on, and I don't know if you guys realize this, but if you just stop walking, the credits will just stay on the screen, like the ones that you brought up. So you can actually sit there and just read them. And I did. I was just see if I recognized any names. So they were each on some sort of individual trigger as you went, which I thought was really neat. And the idea of I like game epilogues, but I especially like when a game epilogue is peaceful. You have the big culmination of the boss fight, like you expect in a third-person action game, no doubt. But then there's this really cool thing where it guides you back into the open world so you can continue your game if you want. But it's freeform and epilogue-ish. I like how you walk up to the different people and gives you a little bit of control, and you can have those optional characters. And I actually walked away from one of the groups just to see what would happen. And it's like, all right, I got to go find my dad. So like you don't even really get to see that part. I dig that. It's cool.
They're like little stations. The only objection I have to the epilogue at all is that I didn't have an inkling that Atreus Loki would be leaving until I'm playing that epilogue, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, these all sound like goodbyes. Like all of these conversations sound like goodbye. And I'm like, I didn't understand that. I didn't realize that, and until you have that last conversation. So I guess in that role as Atreus, you are saying goodbye a little bit there, but I don't feel like the player and the interactions are on the same page for a second in between those. So I think they either gave the game away a little bit for the Kratos interaction, or could have just been presented a little bit differently. But we're nitpicking on that stuff.
All right. Before I ask the last question, are there any other things you guys wanted to bring up that we didn't discuss?
I think I hit all my stuff.
Hoeg, you mentioned the poem name, and I looked it up for MLB The Show, and it's
please.
funny. I have to bring it up.
This is my favorite name. Hit me.
Wait. Okay, it's the first one. Large Society Ground Orb, the performance.
I was looking at going, what in the world? And then it was like, oh, that's MLB The Show.
I love that. I don't know why I didn't notice it. That's so great. I got to go back and look at that. I probably have about 10 more hours before I platinum the game, so I'll see a few more things. Chris, you're satisfied before I have the final question here?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing I will say, it's like, I don't know if you guys felt this way, but I definitely felt this game was a lot easier.
I did too. Yeah.
Yeah. Like even when you die, I don't remember if this was the case in the first game. It might be. It's been a minute. But when you die, you know, you'll get brought back to life with a full health or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay. Like I don't remember if that was the case.
It does do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can manipulate the boss fights if you want to.
Yeah, just totally. Get to the, But no, I don't even think that's a negative. I just think it's like, okay, good, honestly, because like the first game got a little, especially with those goddamn elves.
I dropped the difficulty to easy when I fought the Valkyrie Queen, which is a very rare thing for me to do, because I was like, I cannot do this. Like this is infuriating me. So I dropped it. I dropped it actually.
Speaking of the Valkyrie Queen, I guess I want to add, I did like that the integration into the Ragnarok story assumed that you did all the crap in 2018, right? It has those conversations about converting the Valkyries and doing the post-game epilogue stuff. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I don't know if that threw anybody that didn't wind up doing that in 2018, but I thought it was really interesting.
I did not do it, and I was like, I got no clue what this is.
Sigrun's here. Great. We're happy to have helped.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I noticed that too, and it's bold because you don't often want it. It's not God of War 2 or something. I mean, it is a continuation, but I think they made it so that it probably can be, and by some people will be played alone. I did find, and we noted on Sacred Symbols, that I found the intro, like what happened previously, totally insufficient. I had no idea what the fuck they were talking about. I don't know why they even bothered. I went and watched a half an hour thing. I was like, I don't know what you're saying. Like, I found that truly weird. Also, the way they projected it on the stone face when they're showing it, it's like you can't even see it. I think, and if I can give one piece of advice on that, like they should just take the time and insert a literal Santa Monica studio produced previously on 30-minute, get the actors, get the talking heads, get Corey and all the people and really talk about the game and celebrate it, because I just felt like that was really insufficient. And I was excited when I saw that there, because I went immediately into it, because I'm like, I don't know what the hell. I don't remember. I played that 150 games ago. I have no idea.
What did I remember? Loki, the giants are dead. I don't even know if I remembered there was the Kratos death prophecy.
Yeah.
I literally remembered, Loki. That dude was a secret Loki. That's like what I mostly remembered.
All right, but let's leave it here. I have one final question for you guys, and Chris, we'll start with you. This is we know this is the end of the Norse saga. Kratos lives, and Loki or Atreus lives as well. I think it's safe to assume Santa Monica is going to move on to something else, but they did say something interesting recently, which we went over on the show, which is that they don't mind if they were just become the God of War studio. Eric Williams himself said that he wouldn't be offended by that at all. But he's also said other things, that he wants to make a Castlevania game, which would be fucking sick. And I feel like Sony's not going to actually be so quick to walk away from God of War, because God of War and God of War Ragnarok are massive successes. Like we established, God of War Ragnarok made Sony twice the amount of money it spent on making it in about 3 days. So that's a big win for them. And they're not going to walk away from doing something like that again. But my question is when? Because I don't think it's if. When does God of War come back, and where does God of War come back? And my assumption is that God of War will come back on PS6, and it'll be, and I don't know where, but I think it would be cool if it was something like Aztec or Incan or something like that. That would be fucking dope. Would love that.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a little tricky because now Kratos is God of peace.
Right.
They kind of end gamed themselves a little bit, I feel, where it's like, yeah, you could.
I think they gave themselves that option. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It would be cool to see like Egyptian gods or like different pantheons cool. entirely. I think it'd be really dope to see that, but I just don't know now with the narrative structure as potent and as good as I think it is. I think it was a really wise decision to go in. I don't know if it leaves a lot of room for Kratos to go to Egypt. Like, I just don't know what he would be doing there, and why he would be there killing gods if he's this peaceful force now. Like,
well, I would assume it would be more about maybe. Do you feel like they're kind of bringing in Atreus or?
I think so.
Or Loki, whatever. I don't know.
I think they probably might be setting Atreus up in the same way that they set up. I mean, well, this is the spoilercast for that game, so I won't. I won't.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you mean.
Yeah. I think they might be setting things up for that. I hope not, because I just did not. I didn't feel it, man. Like, we have enough bow character. We have enough rogues. Like pretty much every PlayStation character is a rogue of some kind, and I'm just kind of like, I get it. Like, I like the barbarian.
We got to bring back Colonel Radek from Killzone. That's what we need,
but
more than anything.
I don't know. I would love to see an Egyptian pantheon in some way. That would be dope.
That would be super sick. I love that. The
visuals of that shit. By the way, I've been watching that show, Ancient Apocalypse.
Oh yeah, that's
hell
good
yeah,
shit.
Because you told me to watch it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy.
But I think I think that would be the coolest thing. I would like them to maybe take a little bit of time. I definitely don't think. I don't know. You don't want a repeat of God of War 3 Ascension. Like, I don't think you want that. Like, I think you give us some time to miss Kratos. We already got so much. We already have like 35 hours of him in this game and another 20 minutes on the Game Awards show. So I think we're set on Kratos for a little bit.
Yeah, we got enough of him. Yeah,
but I also don't want to see Atreus, to be real with you. Like, I also don't want to see that.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily. I just think they give, similar to the game you were referencing that we're definitely talking about, but we will not say by name. I think it's just an option, right? Like I think they gave themselves several options. I don't care about ruining a game like Sly 4. Like, Sly 4 ends totally teasing a fifth Sly game, and it just never happened. Like, you just never know. And ironically, it teases it in Egypt, which is so funny that you brought that up, because that's like what the tease is that he's going to go to Egypt. But Hoeg, let's go to you. Where do you think, or when do you think God of War will return? If you do, where, how? And I think we all assume Santa Monica is going to move on. It will be nice because they haven't made a game, not God of War, since Connecticut, which was their first game. So it's been about 20 years. So
I do think the wonder is you need Santa Monica to make God of War. Sony's been bulking up on its studios as well. And I think that there's a possibility that you could run even a smaller God of War project with a different studio, maybe under advisement from Sony Santa Monica. You could start to work on those kinds of relationships between your development studios. But what I would personally like to see happen is for, God of War Greek had one certain type of play style. God of War Norse had one certain type of play style. I would love to see them even try a different kind of God of War. Just like an Assassin's Creed becomes an open world RPG, maybe try that. Maybe not for Egypt, because that might be running a little bit close to Assassin's Creed Origins. But I would love to see. So I personally think Kratos is done. I that felt like an ending to Kratos' story to me. So I would see. I think they would potentially give Atreus the crown there, and I think Chris, he would play more like Kratos in an older model of God of War.
I would hope to God.
Yeah, God of War. He's
so wiry and skinny. It wouldn't be very compelling.
Yeah. You gotta bulk him out. All right. So yeah, he discovers hormones of some kind, and then he just really bulks out. But it wouldn't surprise me. I think if I were going to say what would I like to see as a pantheon, I'd like to see potentially like Native American, First Tribes, Canadian type stuff.
Yeah.
You're talking eagles and all sorts of things like that. I think that would be interesting, and I'm not as familiar with that mythos. So I think you could do some stuff with the Americas and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that would be sick.
That's where I would see him go.
I love that. That would be awesome. Yeah, and I think you guys are right in the sense. Well, I like the way you establish it. That it's hard for me to understand what kind of power all the studios have, and I think it's differing levels of power. We saw Sucker Punch flex their muscles by saying there are no Infamous and Sly games in production because we're not making any Infamous or Sly games, and that's not really for them to say, but they said it and probably had permission certainly to say that. Obviously, we know that The Last of Us Part 1 was taken back by Naughty Dog when it was midway through development because they have control over that. But
like
it is important to note,
developer, right? I don't remember the full details, but it was like they were working on a development team.
Yeah, it's the visual arts group that actually worked most recently on Callisto Protocol and is kind of getting into the news lately because there's apparently something in development there, like a bigger game. But
that's the group that Sony put on Callisto. Okay, I apologize. Right. I'm getting informed.
No, it's all good. Yeah, Sony has farmed this one team out and their Malaysian team out to a few games over time. To help them get over the finish line, usually just in art and animation services. But as far as the future of God of War as a franchise, there's got to be something. I just don't feel like they'll stay away from it. But I think they will give it time to breathe. I think Santa Monica wants to do something else. And Hoeg, you established it. It's worth noting there are two very well regarded God of War games that were not made by Santa Monica in the PSP games, and people love those games. So a lot of people claim those are some of the best God of War games from the old style. So
which studio made those?
Ready at Dawn, who's now with who of course made the Order 1886, and they're now with Meta as a VR full-time developer. But so there is a possibility that happens again. Dustin, what do you think is? We'll leave it with you. What do you think the future holds?
I will hope that they do a different game, but I think that there still could be another story. I think that you could have another Kratos game, but in a different way. My theory, just throwing this out there, Kratos is always in the old and the new is on the hunt. And in the first set of games, he takes out the entire Greek pantheon. And now he has killed, we'll say, most of, or at least the important players of the Norse pantheon. And
he was around. He didn't
right. And so what's important to note is that the gods of the Norse gods know who he is. They know that he's the god killer. And so what if other pantheons hear about this and take this as a threat? And instead, peaceful kings and leaders sometimes still need to be violent in order to defend their territory or whatever.
So you're talking about like an invasion of another pantheon?
That would be sick. I'd love that.
So what if Kratos needs, and that way you can incorporate multiple other pantheons where maybe this is like we've got like older man Kratos. But what if this is like old man Kratos and he's got to defend, instead of him coming after and killing other gods, there's other gods coming to kill him this time because of what he's done in the past, whether righteous in this most recent case or the sins of the past, the unrighteous ones as well. So that would be cool. That's just, Santa Monica.
I love that. That's a fucking awesome idea.
You can have that.
That's an awesome idea. That's a wonderful idea. Yeah, fusing a lot of those different things together could be some pretty cool elements there. Yeah, and he wants to live a peaceful life. He's kind of turned the new leaf, but these guys hear stories of him and simply do not believe that they're not threatened by him. And yeah, that's like a preemptive George W. Bush style.
Logan vibe.
Dude, he's taken out both Zeus and Odin. I mean, obviously Odin was a little bit mixed in that it wasn't actually him in the final moments, but if you were a god of another land, that's a major threat.
What if the last boss is Jesus?
Holy shit.
They're not bringing in Jesus.
Dude,
I just want to disarm this notion.
What a horrible boss! What a horrible boss that would be. Like Jesus is not like he goes like I've come to kill you. And it's like, well, I wait until you see what I can do with this water.
Yeah. Oh, he's like, I've already
he has
died
to
for
fight
your
the Holy
sin.
Spirit too.
It's alcoholic now. Check it out.
You hit one cheek, he gets more powerful. You hit the other cheek, he gets more powerful. That's the whole thing.
Sick. Well, this was fun. This was a great conversation about God of War Ragnarok. Available now on PS4 and PS5. Excited to see more. I think this will be the end as far as this game getting any sort of support too. I think they've been pretty clear that this will not get DLC. So unlike a lot of other PlayStation games, this probably is not going to be revisited. Other than I think they activated photo mode recently. I think it's going to get a new game plus, all the usual accoutrements. But
the PC release, I'm sure, will be a fun thing too. But
yeah, and you weren't around when we talked about it on the show, Chris, but Returnal getting announced for PC represents the closest release between PlayStation and PC release in the history of first or second party. And so outside of a game like Helldivers that was concurrent. So it's we're getting closer and closer. So I say that only because I wouldn't be surprised if God of War Ragnarok came to PC within the next 18 months or less.
Yeah, what's Returnal then? Is it like 15 months, 18 months?
Yeah, it's something like Returnal came out in April, I think, of 2021. So it's something like that, March or April. So yeah, it'll be about 18 months or so, 20 months. So
interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. So I think you're right. And we were noting about it yesterday too. God of War, when it came to Steam, was the biggest game on Steam for PlayStation out of all of them.
PlayStation as a brand is collecting PC fans. They've earned some goodwill on those PC releases. There's no question there. Although it was interesting to see kind of a rejection of Uncharted.
I think it's because it's out of order. Like, why would you want to jump into the fourth game and then some spin-off? You have no context for any of it. I think that's frustrating and weird. That's why we didn't report about it on Sacred Symbols, because I don't know the source. I just don't trust the source, frankly. Sure. But I think it's possible that there is a source saying, like a rumor that Uncharted 1 is being remade. And that to me makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah. And
so they can put Spider-Man in it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We get a new model.
It's a Tom Holland skin.
They can use their new Spider-Man skin. It just fits right in.
Yeah, and then you could do the really easy thing to go play Uncharted 1 remake on your PlayStation 5, then plug in your PS3 to play Uncharted 2 and 3, and then go back to your PS5 to play Uncharted 4.
Good shit.
It's a very simple.
Don't you understand? I think you understand.
Oh yeah.
Now, Drake's Legacy is on PlayStation 4. You could play it on your PlayStation 5. You get 2 and 3. I was just playing.
That's true. On your PS4, you can play all of them, but except for of course, Golden Abyss is missing somewhere.
Well, we're talking about PC. We're talking about PC ports.
Right. No, yeah. With PC, that's true. It's just 4 and Lost Legacy. So, and I think that really hurt it because we were I mean, this is totally off topic. We should go after this, but we were talking about The Last of Us Part 1 also getting a date in March, and I was wondering where that's going to net, because I feel like there's a lot of latent energy, like where that could possibly come out and have 100,000 concurrents. I have no idea. I mean, that game is for hardcore fans. And so we pegged it. Where did we peg it, Dustin? I think we said it would be somewhere between Spider-Man and Days Gone. So I think somewhere like the 40s or something like that.
50 or 60K.
Yeah. Because I'm like, I could see it doing nothing, and I can see it being shocking because it's got such a reputation.
It's weird that it's after the HBO show. I would have assumed it would be right at the start.
I agree. All right. As far as God of War Ragnarok, available now, PS4, PS5, PSN digital, and of course retail. Definitely check it out. I think we all recommend it. And even Hoeg, who I think is the softest out of the four of us, I would assume you'd recommend it at least if it's...
I don't regret my time with God of War Ragnarok.
Yeah. Good. $70 well spent. And hope you enjoyed our conversation. This was a lot of fun. And we'll have Hoeg on again for sure in the future for non-legal means as we have in the past. And Chris and Dustin, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Sacred Symbols and Last Stand. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
See ya.
Take care, guys.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.